Welcome to the most complete Claude Code course on the internet, and realistically the only course that you will need in order to actually understand how to use Claude Code properly. Regardless whether you're just an aspiring agency owner, GTM engineer, or anyone else that is just trying to get the most out of Claude Code. In this video, I'm going to take you from having no real understanding of Claude Code to knowing exactly what it is, when to use it, which tools it replaces in your tech stack, what tools you still need in order for you to become truly dangerous and competent at using Claude Code. And most importantly, I'll show you how you can go from just having a simple idea of what you're trying to build and how you can turn that idea into a finished product, whether that's a software or any other system that you're trying to streamline using Claude Code. Because let me be real, that's where most people get stuck. And yes, most people understand bits and pieces about how to use Claude Code, but they don't really understand how it fits all together, especially when it comes to outbound, lead generation, go-to-market, and streamlining and automating processes that are done manually by your team otherwise. So what I've done here is pretty straightforward. I've structured it as a complete course, where we start from absolute basics, using step-by-step, beginner-friendly frameworks in order to learn how Claude Code actually works. We then walk through specific scenarios of how and where we can implement it inside of our business. And we even go on to then talk about lead generation, go-to-market, client onboarding, building websites, building apps. We cover a lot of cool use cases for Claude Code, which will definitely give you some inspiration around what you can build using this cool technology. And don't get me wrong, by the end of watching this course, you wouldn't just learn Claude Code alone. You will have all the critical frameworks that can help you turn any idea into a finished Claude Code project. And above all, you'll learn how to actually use Claude Code in order to automate real workflows. Whether that's building a new website, building a CRM software app, launching cold outreach campaigns, personalizing code messaging at scale, or simply just replacing your existing outdated tech stack of tools like Zapier, N8N, Make.com, and Clay. Anyways, without further ado, let's jump straight into the course. So here is exactly how the course is structured. We'll start off by breaking down what Claude Code actually is, what it does, how it works, and why it's so powerful, particularly if you're currently doing go-to-markets or if you're running any form of service-based business. Then in part 2, we'll cover why there is so much hype around Claude Code right now. And from there onwards, in part 3, we'll get you set up with Claude Code. And don't worry, because I'll be walking you through everything button by button, and we will also set up other complementary tools, so the terminal, Claude itself, and your IDE of choice. And don't worry if you are not familiar with the IDE acronym, because we'll be talking about it later on. And of course, we'll talk about how to choose the right Claude Code setup based on your specific needs and use cases, how everything fits together between all of these fancy tools that we're going to be setting up in the process. And the main goal of this course is not to get you to blindly follow along the step-by-step tutorials, but rather to explain the thinking behind the scenes so that you can actually understand what you're doing and you can replicate it every single time when you're building a new workflow or a new project inside of Claude Code. In part 6, we'll be talking about the 4 different stages of using Claude Code, because once you understand that, it makes Claude Code so much simpler to use on a daily basis. And in order to get our hands dirty and to start putting in the reps with Claude Code, in part 7, we will build a completely new website from scratch using just Claude Code itself. We will then go on to build our own CRM using Claude Code. And just as a little spoiler, this is the CRM that I've built for myself in the past. You can see it's got contacts, pipeline, companies, and tasks as well. And I'm not sharing the contacts or the pipeline or companies because obviously that will reveal some personally identifiable information. And the parts that I'm most excited about inside of this course is part 9, where we'll be talking about how you can automate the work of a lead generation agency. And we'll be building out a lot of different projects inside of Claude Code to show you how you can do things like finding leads, enriching them, qualifying them, personalizing outreach, and then sending them into automated campaigns via LinkedIn and email automation platforms like SmartLead, Instantly, growth machine, limlist, or anything of that sort. And by the end of part 9, I'm totally convinced that you will feel like an absolute pro when you're using Claude Code. You'll be equipped with all the frameworks, all the templates, and all of that good stuff, which will make your Claude Code learning experience so much smoother. And this will bring us nicely to part 10, where we will then talk about how you can go from an idea to a finished product with Claude Code using some other tips. And I'm sure you can read for yourself what part 10, 11, and 12 will entail, but the main idea of part 10 will be to show to you the exact framework that takes you from an idea to a finished project inside of Claude Code. The idea of part 11 will be to show you how you can actually launch your projects live, be it launching an app, a website, or anything on that sort. And in part 12, I'll be sharing my top 20 plus tips for newbies to Claude Code. And having used Claude Code over the last 2 months every single day, in part 12, I'll be revealing my top tips for newbies when it comes to learning Claude Code and when it comes to actually using Claude Code on a daily basis. These are going to be the kind of hacks which will save you hours of trial and error, so stay tuned for that. Anyways, let's jump into part 1, where we'll talk about what Claude Code actually is. So, before we touch anything technical, we need to get one thing clear. What even is Claude Code in the first place? And in short, it's just AI that writes and executes code for you. And I understand that that may sound a bit abstract. So in order to understand the magnificence of Claude Code, it's essential to understand the 3 phases of artificial intelligence, taking us back to phase 1 back in 2022, when ChatGPT first came out with their product. And typically it was as simple as user inputting some sort of prompt with a bit of context. For example, a user may say something like, hey, here is an essay, rewrite it for me. And the LLM, the large language model, be it ChatGPT, Gemini, or Claude, will then rewrite that essay and will output that essay for the user to then do something with. And that meant that towards the end of that first phase, everyone was struck by the ability of AI to understand your prompt and to repurpose the content based on your prompt. However, it still meant that at the very end of that process, the user still needs to grab that output from the LLM and do something with it. So the user would still need to go to Gmail, to Google Docs, or whatever other file in order to action that essay, in order to paste it somewhere, in order to then turn it into a PDF, for instance. That's where phase 2 came into the picture. And that was the time when we first heard of tools like N8N and Make.com. And that basically combines that AI wow factor from phase 1 together with the ability of AI to be integrated into AI agents and into AI workflows. So for instance, we can now do fancy things like this inside of N8N, where we've got this AI agent, which is connected to ChatGPT, as you can see over here, and it's able to then generate application copy for Upwork jobs, and more than that, it can even create proposals on Upwork on our behalf. And the beauty of phase 2 was the fact that you can now automate all sorts of processes. You could get AI to generate content for you, and you can build all of those fancy AI agents and AI workflows. However, there was still quite a big barrier to entry, meaning that you would still need to be quite technical, quite patient in order to learn tools like N8N or Make.com. And that's where phase 3 came into the picture. And I promise you it's worthwhile to understand this, because this is the only way for you to understand the true power of Claude Code. And the biggest difference is that in phases 1 and 2, they were very passive, very single prompt tools. And here is the thing. By the time that phase 3 came into the picture, everyone was talking about generative AI. And generative AI is the idea that artificial intelligence can only be used to respond to prompts, and you basically then need to go and do stuff yourself in order to action those prompts. And the start of phase 3 was also the start of what people refer to as agentic AI rather than generative AI. So what that basically means is that instead of you having to learn N8N and spend an hour building a workflow like this one over here, instead all you need to do is just chat to it like you would chat to a colleague or a new hire, for instance, and you can basically tell it something like this. And the beauty of phase 3 is the fact that you no longer need to spend an hour building a workflow like this one inside of N8N, but rather you can basically just drop a long, thoughtful prompt to a tool like Claude Code. For example, you could say, build an N8N workflow that researches new leads and adds them into HubSpot. and then write an introduction email to each one of those people. And because now it's agentic AI, it's no longer passive. It's no longer just giving you an output. You no longer need to configure every single step and every single node like we would have to do over here. But instead, AI has access to your entire computer, to all of the tools that you give it access to, and it can basically action those things on your behalf. It can connect all the different APIs together. It can do a lot of freaky stuff on the back end. And that's why every single person on YouTube seems to be talking about agentic AI, whereby all the systems are fully self-functioning and autonomous after you build them. The AI agent can set goals, has really good reasoning. They can help you plan and execute end-to-end the build out of any sort of websites, software tools, automation workflows, and it requires minimal human oversight in theory. So simply put, instead of you having to be super techie and nerdy and technical, you can now basically converse with AI, and if you prompt it correctly inside of Claude Code, you can go from just having a raw idea all the way through to creating an actual app, launching it live on the App Store. You can use it to build apps, build websites, create automations inside of tools like N8N, Zapier, or Make.com, connect any sort of APIs, do anything that you used to do manually, but instead by just speaking to AI and getting it to access the right folders, the right tools, the right logins. And most people are hyping up Claude Code because it enables you to build a lot of cool software product that you can, in theory, then go and sell to others. However, it's still quite unproven because it's only been like 2 or 3 months since Claude Code came out, at the time of me recording this, of course. But in my opinion, the biggest form of leverage when it comes to Claude Code comes in the form of you being just a couple of hours away from building a CRM for yourself or building a new website or something of that sort, which otherwise would have taken you hours of developers' time to do. And the crazy part, you don't need to be technical in order to use Claude Code. You just need to learn how to communicate properly with AI, because at the end of the day, Claude Code is just an AI agent that's super, super smart and has access to your computer. And as I mentioned already, the difference between generative AI and agentic AI is huge. And it's the same as comparing a toddler to a 9-to-5 employee that you can actually trust to run a lot of these processes on your behalf. Just a couple of disclaimers here. Obviously, the output of Claude Code is entirely dependent on your input. That's why we need to understand how to prompt it correctly, how to give it all the context, all the permission, all the accesses, and so on. Just for context, whenever we create any new project inside of Claude Code, it has never seen your business before. It's never seen your workflows. It still needs to be constrained so that it doesn't give you the double dashes, the M dashes in the outputs, for instance. And if you don't explain things correctly, you will get very average results. However, I absolutely guarantee you, if you make it to the end of this course, you'll be able to go from just a crazy idea that you thought you will never be able to pull off yourself without external developers' support, and you will be able to turn this into a working project, be it an app, a website, or something of that sort, inside of Claude Code. And that's the skill that we're building inside of this course. If you're still wondering why there is so much hype around Claude Code, it's down to 3 main reasons. The first reason is the speed. Think about how long it will typically take you to build a CRM from scratch or to build a website like this one that you can see on my screen right now. It will probably take you a couple of days, maybe a couple of weeks. However, with Claude Code, this exact website that you're looking at right now took me 16 minutes to build. And I'll prove it to you because we'll be building a website later on in this course. So feel free to skip the timestamps across to that section if you want to build a new website for yourself. So that's the first big factor. The speed of execution is so much faster. You can be rapid when it comes to getting an idea, building something around it, and then getting that idea live in the form of a website, an app, or something of that sort. Now, the second reason is the cost. Typically, when you're using Claude Code, you may start with a $20 a month subscription to Claude. You may need some other subscriptions on the side, which we'll talk about later on. But typically, your tech stack is not really going to exceed over $200 or $500 if you're like a huge power user. Contrast that with you having to hire a developer, micromanage, babysit, onboard, and recruit a new hire, or having to hire an agency to build your website. Needless to say, the barriers to entry when it comes to the development of apps, websites, and everything of that sort has just gone down by 5x or 10x at least, because it's just so much cheaper and so much more accessible if you know how to use Claude Code correctly. And the third reason for the hype around Claude Code is all around the control element. It's the first time that you can give permission to AI to go inside of your computer to be able to access different websites on your behalf, to perform actions, to connect the APIs, do all of that boring stuff on the back end in order to perform the projects and the tasks that you ask it to perform. All right, before we start setting up your Claude Code account, let's make this super simple. There are only 3 things that you need to understand in order to use Claude Code properly. The first part of the system is Claude itself, the second part is the terminal, and the third part is your IDE of choice. Let's go through those 3 components one by one and simplify it as much as possible. To start off with, we have Claude, which is your AI brain. It's the system that does all the thinking. It creates code for you, it writes code for you, and in order for it to do that, it needs to understand what you're trying to build. And the easiest way to think about the role of Claude inside of this Claude Code system that we're going to be setting up is to think about Claude like a developer being sat right next to you. A developer that never gets tired, never gets frustrated, and that has read every single programming resource on the internet. You can talk to it in plain English, Spanish, Mandarin, or whatever language you prefer to chat to it in, of course. And it responds, first of all, with explanations, secondly, with clarifying questions, just to clarify how you want Claude to write code for you. And thirdly, on top of that, of course, it works on writing and executing that code on your behalf. Don't worry, in the next timestamp of this video, we'll be talking about how you can set up your Claude account in order to pull this off. And as a little teaser, it's just as simple as you having a Claude account, which is just a paid Claude account on the $20 a month plan or above. All right, now that we covered what Claude's role inside of this entire setup is, it's now time to talk about the terminal. And if you go into your Finder on your MacBook, and if you type in terminal, you would be able to open the terminal, which would look literally like an empty black page. And by the way, if you're on Microsoft, you may want to double check this, but it should be as simple as you typing terminal into the search bar and you will be able to find the terminal app on your computer as well. So if you think about it, usually the way that you use a computer is by clicking around all the different folders, buttons, menus, websites, and so on. The terminal is just another way to interact with a computer, but using text instead. Now, the good news about the terminal is the fact that you will not really be using this interface inside of the terminal, and whenever you need to use that interface there, you can simply prompt Claude and it will tell you what to paste into the terminal over here. However, you would need to set up the connection between Claude and the terminal just once, and I'll show you how to do that in a couple of minutes. And after that, hopefully you will not really have a need of touching the terminal going forward. And if I just give you a quick analogy to just oversimplify things, if your normal computer experience and the way that you use your computer on a daily basis is like a touchscreen menu at McDonald's, then the terminal is the equivalent of you walking up to the counter, having to speak to a person and having to communicate the order item by item to a person in order for them to add that to their system. So the terminal is super, super powerful. And if you're nerdy and technical, you could, in theory, just use Claude together with the terminal. And that way you can build all your apps and all of that stuff just using these 2 tools mainly. However, if you want to experience the magic of Claude Code, you would need to find an IDE. And an IDE is just an acronym that stands for Integrated Development Environments. And the 2 most popular IDEs that most people use are either Google Anti-Gravity or Visual Studio Code. For the purpose of this course, I highly recommend that you use Visual Studio Code. And this is a tool which has been developed by Microsoft. From my experience, it's the least buggy of all the different IDE tools that you have the option of using. And just to show you the behind the scenes after you download an IDE like Visual Studio Code, it will look something like this. On the very left-hand side, you will see all the different documents that are stored as a part of a project that you're working on. Then on the right-hand side, you will have the chat with Claude. And super simply put, your IDE is like the cockpit that brings all of this magic together. And just to be 100% clear here, your IDE is basically the cockpit that brings it all together. It's just like a centralized dashboard view, which combines three main things. The first thing is the folders and the data and the files that you upload as a part of every single project that you're working on. So all the scrappy PDF files or anything of that sort. The second thing that it has access to is your terminal. So it's got a built-in terminal and it can basically action anything that you tell AI to action. It will action on your behalf inside of the terminal on your behalf. And the third function of the IDE is the ability to basically access all the different apps on your computer, all the different websites on your computer, and assuming that you give it the right level of permissions, it can then go and log into your N8N account. It can build you an N8N flow. It can go then use your API key to connect different tools and do all of that fun stuff. So just to understand the entire experience, you will basically talk to Claude in plain English. Claude will then digest this into code and it will send those instructions into the terminal. And then the IDE is just a nice user interface where all the work actually lives. And that's the kind of place where you can actually go and build your apps and all of your fun projects inside of the IDE of your choice. All the IDEs are very intuitive to use. If you use one IDE like Visual Studio Code, it's very intuitive to then switch over to Google Anti-Gravity or Cursor or any sort of other IDE of choice. So bear that in mind. I very much recommend that we start off with using Visual Studio Code to start with. And then if you do see any limitations, you can always move to another IDE. And worth noting that the IDE is completely free. The terminal is completely free. The only subscription that is required in order for us to set up Claude Code is just a Claude subscription. And just so that we're all on the same page, the way that you will typically work is that you will describe in plain English your idea to Claude. Claude then processes that idea. It runs it through the terminal, which is just the middleman in this case. And the terminal then edits or creates the files inside of the IDE of choice. And that's how your app, your system, your workflow, your website, whatever it is that you're building, that's how it basically gets created, starting off with Claude, then into the terminal, then into your IDE of choice. So simply put, Claude is just the AI brain, the terminal is how you give instructions, and the IDE is just where everything lives. Once you understand that, everything else in this course becomes a lot easier. And worth noting that the terminal does not come at a monthly subscription fee. The IDE does not come at a monthly subscription fee. The only tool that is a paid tool that is required in order for you to run Claude Code is Claude itself. And that starts from as low as $20 per month. And don't worry, because we'll be talking about how to set up all of these accounts later on in the course. Okay guys, it's about time that we set up a Claude account, we connect it to Terminal, and we connect it to our IDE of choice so that we can finally use all of these accounts all together and so that we can start building projects later on in the course. So to start with, all I want you to do is to navigate over to Claude.ai and sign up for a free Claude account if you haven't done that already. As soon as you're inside of your Claude account, you can click on your name in the bottom left-hand corner, and you can then type it. You can then click into Upgrade Plan, and over here you should be able to upgrade to a paid plan, which starts for as cheap as £15 per month. If you're on an annual plan, or if you're on a monthly billing, it will cost you about $20 per month on average. After you've done that, you should be able to fill in your payment details, and then you can just type in Claude Connect to Claude Code. And if you type in connect Claude to Claude Code, you should see this quick start guide. Typically, you're redirected to it as soon as you sign up for a paid Claude plan, but if not, you can just head over to this link in the browser, which is code.claude.com/docs/quickstart. And you can pause my screen for a second right now. You can pause the video and just basically copy this URL into your browser. To start off with, we would need to connect Claude to a terminal. So in this case, it will give you this command at the very top over here. So if you're running all of this on a MacBook or any sort of Apple device, in this case, you can click copy and copy this URL to clipboard. If not, you can just switch to Windows. If you're a Windows user, you can just copy this to clipboard. And all we're going to do now is just copy it and then type in terminal into the Finder on our computer. And you should be able to see that now it opens up the terminal, and we talked about the terminal earlier. It's either going to be a light screen or a dark screen. It's going to be completely empty. All we need to do is just paste that URL and click on enter. As soon as we do that, typically you will think for a second. You will start telling us that it's setting up Claude Code. You will say that Claude Code has been set up successfully. And it says over here, next, run Claude help to get started. So all I'm going to do is just grab this Claude help. And basically I'm just going to paste it here and then click on enter because it just told us to do that. And you can see it says installation complete. And it basically just gives us all of this funky text over here. If throughout the process it just gets overwhelming and you're seeing a lot of information on the screen like I am over here, all you need to do is just select all of this in one go by clicking on Command A. And then, of course, you can just copy all of this into Claude itself. And if we go back into the Claude chat, just say, help me set up Claude Code on my terminal. And then just paste all of this random text that we can see over here inside of the terminal. So in this case, it tells us, hey, it tells us that you've already installed Claude Code. The output shows the installed version. So all we need to do now, like typically it will just give you a bunch of things that you need to copy and paste. So in this case, we can just copy this and I'm going to scroll to the very bottom. I'm going to paste it here and just click on enter. And all it will require now for me is just to authorize my account in order to connect Claude to the terminal. And over here it says you're all set up for Claude Code. You can now close this window. So at this point in time, after you've done the same on your side, you can just type in Claude and click on enter. And you should be able to see now it's just going to ask you for some basic permissions. To be honest, for every single time that I've recorded this part so far, for various other videos as well, it gives you different kinds of questions every single time. So it's not necessarily that you will follow the exact same flow as I am following now, but all you need to do in case is just basically copy and paste the entire text from here into Claude, and it will basically instruct you on how you can basically install Claude into your terminal. So in this case, it says, quick safety check, is this a project you created or one you trust? I'll say, yes, I trust this folder, and I'm going to use the one over here and click on enter. And you should be able to see now that it says, hey, welcome back. Here is how you can get started. And if you don't want to have a messy terminal over here, all you need to do is type in clear and click on enter. And in this case, it should just clear everything that's at the top over here. Anyways, now if you just type in Claude over here, if it comes up with how can I help you, that means that Claude has already been installed successfully inside of your terminal. And that means that out of the 3 things that we needed to set up, we have already set up a Claude account, we have already connected it to a terminal, and we've set up the terminal for success because it now has a connection with Claude. And then finally, the 3rd thing that we need to do is go and type in Visual Studio Code. And if we go into the Visual Studio Code website, in the top right-hand corner, you should be able to see the download button, and you should be able to download it for your computer. So if you're a Windows user, you can click into Windows. If you're a Mac user, just click on Mac. And over here, we should be able to see that if we click into download again, it should be downloading in our downloads folder in the top right-hand corner. All I'm going to do now is just click into it, and all we need to do now is just drag it into this applications folder, which will take a second. In my case, I've already had it downloaded before, so I'm going to replace it, and you should see that it takes a couple of seconds to download. And after it's been downloaded, you should be able to see it on your screen somewhere. And if you can't see it on the screen, just go into the spotlight search in the top right-hand corner and type in VS Code, and you should be able to see Visual Studio Code being an application on your device. So in this case, we can now click into it and you will open up Visual Studio Code. And it's, of course, it will give you some warning saying that it's an app that you downloaded from the internet. Are you sure you want to open it? Of course, in this case, we'll click on open, assuming that we downloaded it from the legitimate VS Code website. And here we are, we're inside of our integrated development environment. Now, the final step of this setup will be for us to head into extensions on the left side of the panel here and type in Claude. And be very careful whenever you install any sort of extensions, because you can only install extensions from legitimate companies in most cases. So over here, since it says Anthropic and it's a verified account according to this checkbox, tick box thing over here, we can trust it because we can see it's been downloaded by over 7.5 million users. We can now click on install, and over here we can now click on trust publisher and install, because we definitely trust the publisher, aka Claude. So what this will basically enable us to do is to connect Claude into our IDE. So that means that on the left hand side, after you click on that install button, you should be able to launch Claude Code. So all we're going to do now is click into Claude Code, and you should now be able to start a new session. So if you click on new session over here, you can see that a new screen pops up in the middle of the screen. And this is where you can start conversing with Claude Code. So for example, here you could type in something like, I want to build a CRM for my gardening company. However, don't do that, because you haven't learned the principles behind how to use Claude Code just yet. And one thing to keep in mind, one thing that's super mission critical inside of Claude Code, is the fact that in the bottom right hand corner, you should be able to see it says ask before edits. If I click into it, it gives me a couple of different options. And one thing that I want to point out straight away before we do any sort of walkthrough of Visual Studio Code, in the bottom right hand corner over here, whenever you type in any prompt, you can choose the mode that you want Claude Code to adopt. So if we click into the mode over here, you've got plan mode, and plan mode is whereby Claude Code will not action anything. It will just brainstorm with you, and it will just enable you to plan anything before you even start building any sort of project, like a CRM for a gardening company, for instance. Now, typically you would start off in plan mode. After that, you may switch to ask before edits mode. And over here it says this is when Claude will ask for approval before making every individual edit. And once you build the reps, you build the trust, you understand how this works, you can then switch to edit automatically, whereby Claude will edit all of the text and the whole file, and it wouldn't ask you for approvals for tiny little things like adding a full stop at the end of the sentence. If this is overwhelming, don't worry, because we'll be doing an entire button-by-button overview of how to use Claude Code inside of Visual Studio Code. However, just for you to get a real grasp of how you would typically start a new project, the first thing that you would do before entering the Visual Studio Code application, the first thing that you will typically do is just create a folder on your computer. So in this case, I'm going to click on new folder over here, and I may call this something like Tim's Crazy Claude Code Skills, right? Just as an example. And this can be where all of my projects are stored. So it's essential for us to have a folder created before we enter Visual Studio Code. After that, on the left-hand side of the panel, in the top left-hand corner, where we click on the Explorer, we can click on Open Folder. And in this case, I'm now going to navigate to the desktop. I'm going to navigate to Tim's Crazy Claude Code Skills, and I can then open it. And this will mean that now Claude Code will ask us for access to that specific folder. So we can click on Allow, and over here, we will need to ensure that we trust the authors of that folder. So that means that whenever you download anything from the internet, don't download random PDF files, random markdown files from random people that you don't know, because it could be buggy a lot of the time. Because of course, a lot of the time it can make you prone to getting some sort of viruses or something else. So in this case, we can see that we've just gotten access to this specific folder. And assuming that we've added some documents to that folder, we should be able to see a drop down over here with all the documents that we've added there. And if we click into this specific Claude Code sign, we can now open up a chat over here with Claude Code, and we can close this other chat. And this way we can start planning an idea inside of Claude Code, having access to all of the PDFs, all of the attachments, all the documents that we need in order to create this specific project. Now, really quickly, just as you start using Claude Code, it will typically ask you for permissions to do any sort of task. So if you ask it to build a website, it will literally ask you for permission to access a specific file in a specific folder, for instance. If you want to give a lot of common sense permissions to Claude Code in order for it to do its thing without asking you for micro tiny little annoying approvals, then in this case you could literally just paste this exact text that you can see on my screen right now. It literally says Claude _permission mode accept edits, and if I just basically paste it into the Claude chat, you can then say implement it for me, and it will then say use this update config skill, and it will basically just give you a high level overview of what you're doing. But in this case, I will say yes, allow for this project. And what this will basically mean is that it wouldn't ask you for tedious tiny little permissions throughout the execution of this specific project. And don't worry if this is a bit overwhelming right now, because we'll talk about the permissions and everything of that sort in the security part of this course later down the line. But for the time being, I'm just going to click on yes, allow update, because this will just prevent you from having to give it permissions for every tiny little action as it performs a bunch of tasks. And in this case, it will say, make this edit to settings.json. Again, in this case, I'll say, yes, allow access to .claude for this session, and that should do the job. And you will notice straight away, it's the same as you speaking to ChatGPT, apart from it's basically able to adjust permissions, access files, create things, and so on. And you can see right now it says done. By default right now, it has started. Any sort of file edits will be auto-approved globally, and this just means that you wouldn't dangerously skip permissions, but you will just skip permissions when it comes to editing any files, which in most cases is a sensible idea to have working for you. Now, if you want to use the timestamps underneath the video in order to skip into the part where we give you a UI and UX button-by-button walkthrough of Visual Studio Code, by all means, feel free to do that. But in the next section of this course, I'll be talking to you about the super simple and intuitive 4-step framework that I use in order to build every single Claude Code project, all the way from the planning phase through to getting the project live on a website, in an app, or anything of that sort. So I very much encourage you to check out the next section of this course, because you really need to get a good grasp of the theory before then proceeding with using Claude Code and building all of this fancy stuff later down the line in later sections of the course. All right, guys, now it's about time that we get our hands dirty and we start putting in the reps inside of Claude Code. And what better way to do this than to start off with a real project? And in this case, I'll be building out a complete website completely from scratch, just from an idea stage all the way through to a website being published on a platform like Webflow in my case. So what I want you to do for this part is to follow along, and at the same time, we're going to cover the exact checklist that we need to go through in order to go from idea over to the finished product, which is a live website landing page, which is published on Webflow. If you want to follow along and grab all the resources that I screen share throughout this video, all you need to do is just head over to the top link in the description down below and click on that link, and it will take you into a bunch of free resources like this checklist over here, which you can follow along and make sure that you don't miss any of those nitty-gritty details throughout building out your project. To start off with though, I'm going to share with you what the final output may look like. In my case, I'm working on a new offer. In my case, this will be a community that teaches people all of these new fancy AI and automation tools, be it Clay, Cursor, Claude Code, N8N, or anything of that sort. And my idea is to call this Unlock Courses and to basically have a fancy, nice looking website similar to this one that you can see on my screen right now. In your case, as you follow along and you build a website, I very much encourage you to find the website of a competitor or someone that provides very similar services to yourself. And based on that, I will show you how we can basically clone the exact website of a competitor and how we can then add our own unique spin to that website to make it look way better than any competitor out there. And throughout this build out, I'm also going to pause for a couple of seconds and explain various concepts like Claude.md, planning phase MD, and so on, and some of these concepts that you need to get a good grasp of when you are creating any projects inside of Claude Code. So to start off with, before you even consider starting, all you need to do is head over into Visual Studio Code, and before that, just go into your computer somewhere and click on New Folder. And in this case, you can just name your folder Test or whatever you want to call your folder, just so that you can identify it inside of Visual Studio Code. In my case, I'll be using this folder called YouTube Website Walkthrough. And I'm basically then going to go in the top left-hand corner over here inside of Visual Studio Code. I'm going to click on Command O. So that's Command O on the keyboard on my Mac. And I should be able to then go into Desktop and basically find the folder where I want all the documents for this specific project to be stored. So in this case, it will be the YouTube website walkthrough, and I'm going to click on Open, and that way we should be able to see now. You'll ask me for permission to access this folder. I'll say, yes, I trust the authors. And that's typically what you would do every single time, regardless of what project you're working on. You first need to give Visual Studio Code access to a folder with all of that information. More than that, if you want to upload any files going forward, you can click on New File over here, and then you can upload any files that may be relevant for this. And don't worry, because we'll be talking about this in just a couple of minutes from now. So the first thing that we've done already is we've opened a new folder. We've started a new project inside of IDE already. We know this because it says welcome over here at the top. And if we want to rename the project, we can just close this tab so it doesn't get too annoying. And if we click into this Claude sign over here where it says Claude Code. We can now click on new session. We can now close the tab on the right hand side over here. And if we're inside of our project over here, and if we click into the Claude Code button in the bottom left hand corner over here, we can now click on new session. And if we head back into the project, we should be able to see this new session has started. We have Claude Code chat open over here. And we now also have access to the YouTube website walkthrough folder on the left hand side. Now, here is the thing. Before we jump into building out the actual project, we need to understand that typically most projects will have the following 4 stages. The first stage of any project is the planning phase, when we're just planning and scoping this specific project. And typically for the purpose of this stage, we will always make sure that we switch this toggle to plan mode so that we can plan using Claude Code's help in this case. The second phase will be the build phase, and typically the build phase can be separated into a couple of phases in itself. So you can basically just have like phase 1, phase 2, and so on, right? So you get the idea. Most of the time you will split it into 3 to 4 phases just to make sure that you're not giving too much tasks to Claude in one go, because it's easier to just do it a part at a time. So you build like the first part of the website, the second part, the third, and the fourth part. Okay, cool. Before we can jump into the rest of the project, it's about time that we talk about what Claude.md files are and why this will determine over 80% of your success inside of Claude Code. So first of all, .md is just a formatting type, very similar to CSV files, PDF files, or any sort of other fancy acronym like PNG. It's just a different way to format your files. So MD is just short for Markdown, and basically it's just a formatting way to format the data for Claude. And the main purpose of a Claude.md file is to store all the project instructions. So this is like your custom instructions, if you will. If you've ever used a Claude project, or if you've ever used a custom GPT before, this is run from project instructions, and Claude.md files are very similar to project instructions, and they always have to be in the form of an MD file. And in every single project that you start, it has to be called Claude.md in order for Claude Code to recognize this properly. The main purpose of that, as I mentioned already, is that it contains all your project instructions and all the context for Claude. And just simply put, Claude does not actually know anything about you. So like if we go into the chat over here, Claude does not really know anything about you until you upload a Claude.md file and give it some instructions. For the purpose of this one, I've actually created a Claude.md file which follows along a specific process, and it basically, I'll show it to you in a couple of seconds when we start using it. But you can always import the same Claude.md file, and then after that we will go into planning phase, whereby we plan the actual workflow, and we can then tell Claude Code to adapt the Claude.md file and to adapt that planning phase MD file for us as well, and it will adapt it based on that project planning that we do throughout that process. So essentially the main thing here is that in order for you to use the Claude.md file, all you need to do is just click into it over here, click on download, and just import it into that folder which Studio Code has access to. And then if you click over here, you should be able to see that now it has access to Claude.md, it has access to planning phase as well. And typically whenever you upload any sort of MD file, there is a shortcut involved. So if I close it over here and if I type in /init, I think it stands for initiate, I assume. And then if I click on enter, you can see that the first thing that it does is it basically just tells you everything that it knows based on the resources that you attach in that folder. So as soon as you upload any items over here, you can just run the /init command. And based on that, you would see all of this funky thinking that Claude Code does on the back end. And it will then summarize to you everything that it understands based on the project. And of course, up to this point, we haven't even started planning the project, but we're just giving it some basic principles. So if we go into the Claude.md file over here, we're structuring it based on workflows, agents, tools, and the main idea for this is just to give you like one SOP, one standard operating procedure, which I'll walk you throughout this course, so that regardless what workflow you're building, you will always follow the same structure and you don't need to start from scratch every single time. And then on top of that, the planning phase over here, you can read it for yourself. It just basically walks through the different stages of planning. So how we set it up, how we write the brief, how we talk about project architecture, tech stack, clarifying questions, all of that good stuff. And I'll talk to you about all of this in greater detail later down the line. But for the time being, just know that you can reliably use the Claude.md file and the planning phase MD file that I've spent a lot of time putting together for you. So in this case, you can see it's asked me to accept this plan. I'll say yes and manually approve edits because I still want to have some control over it. And then if I scroll across over here, you can see that I've already added the following MD file. I've added the planning phase MD file as well. We've covered briefly what Claude.md does. And after you upload both of these files and you explain your requirements, you can then ask Claude to update that Claude.md file for you. But for the time being, don't worry about this because I'll be walking you through everything step by step, and you'll see me build this website at the same time as you building it on your side as well. So the way they will work now is Claude.md will provide us with the project instructions. This will basically feed the system prompt, and that will train up the Claude Code agent in order to basically be able to do all of that funky stuff for us. And that means that whenever we send a user message in the future, it will remember those project instructions and it can follow those project instructions, which are inside of that Claude.md file. So to start off with, what we need to do is that we need to write our brief in plain English. We don't need to be technical, nothing of that sort. We just need to open a new Claude chat window inside of our IDE, which is something that we've done already. You can see it over here. And all that we need to do now is explain to a 5-year-old what we're basically trying to do with this website, and we're going to state our goal in plain English. So what we mean by that is we'll just basically just chat to it over here. For the purpose of this demo right now, I'll be using a tool called Whisperflow, and I will reference it in the guide, which will be the top link in the description down below. And it's a voice dictation tool, which basically enables you to just speak, and it will basically type it out for you. So in my case, all I need to do is just click on a button on my keyboard. So in my case, you can see over here, it pops up with this window, and as soon as I basically stop saying something, it will then basically just transcribe it for me. So a lot of the time I'm a lot faster speaking than I am typing, and I can't be bothered to type all of this stuff. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to click on this button, and of course if you choose to type instead, and I'm basically going to say something like this. I'm looking to build a website for my new community called Unlock Courses. I wanted to be hosted on Webflow, and I wanted to follow the color themes of my existing website and my existing brand. I want the logo to be very similar to the logo of my existing courses, and I want to borrow a lot of the information from my current courses pages, and I want the one button click ability on that website to then buy the product by being redirected to the checkout. Based on this, let me know what clarifying questions you have and what inputs you would need from me in order to make this a successful project. So, as I mentioned just now, this could take a while for you to type out, but I'm just basically speaking it all out. I very much recommend that you get a tool similar to Whisperflow. They do have a free plan to start with as well. And if we go back over here, you can see I've explained it to a 5-year-old. I've stated my goal in plain English because I want to publish this on Webflow. Like one thing, whenever we reference a similar existing tool or a similar website, in this case, we may need to actually copy the website itself. And in my case, let's say if I want to copy the Unlock Clay website as an example, and for those of you that may not be aware, Unlock Clay is one of the courses that I run, which teaches you clay.com from beginner level all the way through to intermediate level. In this case, in order for me to copy any website's design and text and everything, in this case, all I need to do is just navigate to the website, click into the website, like right click into it, and you will see the inspect button. Over here, after you click on inspect, you should see all of this random pop-ups in the middle of your screen. And if you go back to the website, you should be able to format this as 1920 by 1080. And on the right hand side over here, you can click on the 3 dots if you're in Chrome, and you can then capture full-size screenshots. After you click on capture full-size screenshot, you should be able to see, if you proceed over to your downloads folder, that the PNG version of the website has been downloaded. All right, cool. So now that we've screenshotted the website, we should be able to see it. So if I navigate over into the folder, you should be able to see over here a PNG image, whereby we've screenshotted the entire website. We can see it over here. I've just added it into the relevant folder where we can use this screenshot as inspiration for how we want to build a new website. And more than that, if we right click into the website again now, and if we, instead of inspect, if we just refresh the website again, let's just reload it really, really quickly. And what we can do instead this time is we can right click, and instead of inspect, we can now right click and click on view page source. And this will give us all the HTML text from the website. So you can see this is everything that's installed on the website. It will include everything ranging from the color scheme of the website to the text to everything else. So what I'm going to do is create a quick Google Docs file out of this. I'm going to copy and paste all the information here, and I'm going to call this HTML of the Unlock Clay website, just as an example. And then after that, I can click into File, Download, PDF, or actually, let's do it as a Markdown file because it's most compatible with Claude Code. And in this case, all I'm going to do is just drop this Markdown file straight into the YouTube folder, which we've created specifically for this project. So up to this point, if we just recap what we've done so far, we've used the voice transcript tool. We didn't overthink it too much. We used the template of an existing website. We copied the HTML code. We also copied and screenshotted the entire website. And all of that was added into an existing folder. That means that we can now go back into the Visual Studio Code chat. And based on the inputs that we provided, it will ask me clarifying questions back. So make sure every single time when you're in plan mode, the first thing that you do is just you dump all of those ideas over here and you get Claude to basically ask you some clarifying questions. So over here, it will say all the questions. So in my case, it's like, what's the URL of your existing websites and courses pages? So in this case, I'm just going to say unlock clay.com as an example, right? And I also own unlockna10.com, which is the course that teaches you Claude Code, NA10, and Cursor as well. And then secondly, it asks, do you have logo files available, PNG or SVG? In this case, I'll say no, create a logo for me and make sure it is similar to the Unlock Clay logo, but featuring Unlock Courses text instead. And then number 3, what fonts does your brand use? If you know, no idea, check the website HTML and MD files. And then it will ask you a bunch of other questions. In the meantime, I'm sure you can just be busy answering the questions for yourself. But in my case over here, you'll ask me some other questions like how many courses or products will be on the site? What are their names? I will just dump this over here really quickly as well. So for question 4, where it asked me about how many courses and products, I just basically gave it the names of all the courses. And then I said, research them on the internet because I assume that Claude Code has access to the internet. And then question 5, what are the price points for each? I'll just say research on Google for me, please, because I don't want to tell it more information, like you can find this out for itself. What pages do we want? I will just say one simple landing page because I don't want to overcomplicate things. And then later on, it will ask which platform handles your checkout today. I'm going to just say Circle because that's where I host all of my communities and courses. Do you have a Webflow account? Yes. How comfortable are you in Webflow? I'll say I'm a newbie because I don't really want it to have a technical setup. And then I'm going to say single page scroll to answer question 11. And you get the idea. Most of this is super intuitive. It's just answering similar to how you would answer any of your colleagues asking you questions. And if you don't know, just tell it that you don't know. And it says you need a community membership login area. Is there a checkout? I'll say, yeah, I will add the checkout URL page here. And then I'm just going to go and grab the checkout URL really quickly inside of my course. So let's have a look. And I've just pasted the link over here. And then it doesn't ask me any other questions. I'm just going to say, do you need anything else clarified? Right? And in this case, I've typed out the answer, but typically I would just speak at it using Whisperflow that I showed to you earlier already. So let's give it a couple of seconds to think. And bear in mind that it's still in plan mode. So the idea behind this is just to plan everything. And over here where I gave you the checkbox of referencing a similar existing tool, in this case, we're referencing like a similar website, right? So we're already doing that. We've attached some reference files, templates, and PDFs already. So that should be fine. And now we just basically want to see what else it comes up with. Also, sometimes it will ask you questions in this format, which is quite nice to answer it in. So where it says, what does Unlock Courses subscription include and what's the price? I'll say all courses bundled and then community plus courses. And then I'm going to submit the answer. And then based on that, I'm also going to just give it a bit more context. So it's saying, now it's asking what's the subscription price and billing frequency. So over here, I'll select other and I'll say the subscription will cost users $49.99 per month in dollars. And that will include access to unlimited courses as a part of the Unlock Courses membership. Also, we include weekly hangout sessions with experts and course instructors teaching new hacks that are new releases or anything of that sort around AI tools like Cursor, NA10, Claude, or Clay. And there will be new courses added as the technology evolves and as AI evolves over time as well. And then you can see after that, I can just click on Submit Answers, and that submitted it for me straight away, a lot faster than typing in that that case. And on the back of that, let's just give it some time to think. And in the meantime, on the left-hand side, we can see all the resources that are available for Claude Code already. So we have the MD file, we have the HTML of the website, we have the planning phase document, and the unlock clay website itself, the PNG, like the visuals of it. Now, in the meantime, whilst it thinks, I'm also going to give it some more context on the goals and constraints. So I'm just going to copy and paste all of this stuff over here, just so I'm looking at it at the same time as typing. And you can see it just talks about what's the goals, what are the relevant files, constraints, all of this stuff. So I'm just going to improvise this completely, and I'm going to say something like this. The main idea behind this website is to include a bunch of different courses in return for one flat monthly subscription fee. We really want to communicate to the target audience, stating that this is the best and most affordable way to stay on top of AI trends and everything of that sort, whilst not having to buy new courses every single time the new technology is out. And also you have the community support in order to help you out with that. So now that we've typed this up, let's see where it ends up. And then we can review the plan on the right-hand side. So this is the plan that it comes up with. So it basically just gives you this, like community benefits, who this is for, testimonials, pricing, FAQs, CTA banner, like all of this stuff is pretty good for like a replica website. And after that, we can either manually approve edits or we can auto accept. Because I'm fairly confident I've done this before, I know this should be pretty good. So I'm just going to click on yes and auto accept. This will automatically accept all of those changes and the actual plan. So based on this, let's head back into this. Let's just tick these boxes. Let's assume that we've defined the goals and the constraints. In terms of the project architecture, in this case, Claude basically did it for us. So I'm going to tick through that. And we already answered Claude's clarifying questions, so we can tick that off. We've set up the Claude.md file. And just worth reiterating at this stage, Claude.md is the foundation. It just tells Claude all the context on who you are, how you want Claude to behave, what the project is, what the rules are to follow. Everything else will build on top of that Claude.md file. So it's very important to make sure that your Claude.md file is up to speed. And then the planning phase MD is the second markdown file that we're uploading, and this is your workflow for starting any new build, and it will basically sit inside of the workflows folder. Again, you don't really need to worry about this for the time being, but this will be referenced by Claude Code as it goes through the build out of the actual project, and this will just make sure that your plan is followed throughout the actual project. And then the third step, after we've got Claude.md set up and the planning phase set up, and after we basically just do all of this stuff, you should now be able to see that it comes up with an actual list of to-do list items. So it gives you those checkboxes over here, and usually it wouldn't give you the checkboxes if you didn't have that Claude.md file in the first place. So like this is a nice visual way to basically look through what Claude Code is doing, and you don't really need to understand the code behind it for the time being. You just need to be able to see that, like, hey, it's created a logo for Unlock courses, and now it's moving to build the complete landing page, and then it will basically just help you deploy it inside of Webflow, right? And you can see it's still going. So assuming that it's loading at the bottom here, it should be completely fine. So let's just give it a bit more time. And now it's just a patience game, because most of the time as you build this out, it's good to just go grab a coffee, go grab a drink, whatever you need, because a lot of the time this will just be running in the background, and you can see it's just loading as I'm speaking now as well. And just to reiterate this, if we just try and simplify all of these different resources that are fed into Claude Code. So Claude.md is basically the equivalent of you having like a job description and a company handbook with all the values and all that cool stuff, right? If you then look at the planning phase MD, that's just the onboarding checklist for like an employee that joins your company, right? It's completely optional. Not many people actually have a planning phase MD. Most people just get by with a Claude.md file. But I found that with a planning phase MD, just keeps it a bit more structured. And that way you can have like a great structure, and visually it's really nice when you have like a checklist of items, and you can track progress in real time as well. And all of these items are ticked off as you go along. And then on top of that, the skills, and you will see a lot of videos on YouTube or elsewhere as well, where people talk about skills with Claude Code, and skills are those tasks that you train Claude Code to do, and then you can save it as a skill. So similar to how at the end of you building an NA10 workflow or make scenario or clay table, you will have a template or some sort of file that you can save for future reference. That's what a skill is. After you train Claude how to create a website, you can save it as a skill, and next time it will basically be able to build a website a lot faster using your previous rules and instructions and knowledge. In the meantime, you can see that all 3 deliverables are ready. The logo is ready, so we should be able to see it over here. We've got a landing page that's ready, and the Webflow guide is ready as well. So it says over here, suggested order, just open the HTML file in your browser to preview the design. And then in this case, I'm just going to say how to open that, because I have no idea how to actually open it. And in this case, it will say open Finder, navigate to your folder in your desktop. So in this case, I'm going to go to Finder, and then over here, I should be able to see Unlock Courses HTML. So let's just double click into it, and we can see what the website came up with. So it says $49.99 per month, 1 membership every course. Get instant access to Unlock Clay, Unlock NA10, and Unlock Clay for Recruiters, plus weekly expert sessions and every new course we release. Join Unlock Courses, 30-day money-back guarantee, cancel anytime, 1.5k students, 5 5-star rating, 3 courses included, new courses every month, weekly live sessions. And in this case, it talks about all the courses they included, so Unlock Clay, Unlock NA10, Unlock Clay for Recruiters. I actually have a couple of new courses coming out as well soon, which I've spent like tens, if not hundreds of hours recording over the last like 6 months or so. And then it talks about like the community, what you get, like weekly live sessions, how you're always growing. You have a private community. It talks about who this is for as well. It talks about like the payment cycles, the results. It actually pulls up some of the testimonials from the previous websites as well. And then it gives you the pricing. And then if you click into join Unlock Courses, it redirects you straight into the payment link for that, which is absolutely insane if you ask me. It even comes up with FAQ section, and then every single time it has a call to action, it redirects you there. So if you ask me for feedback on this, like typically I would go back to Visual Studio Code in this case, wherever it is, and I would just say like, hey, based on this website, I like a lot of things. I don't like, the font, because the font is not so premium. So look for like a more premium type of font, which is a bit more elegant, something a bit more expensive, because this looks like a WordPress website right now. And of course, I can go back and forth and basically go through it that way. So this is basically, up to this point, we've planned the website, we've built it, and of course, like if we want to converse with Claude Code, we absolutely can do that, but I honestly just don't want to spend another half an hour of this course just showing you how I'm basically saying, hey, change the font, change the size of the title, change the logo, right? All of this stuff will require the same thing as what we've done so far. We just type it in as a prompt, we then basically wait for it to do it, and then we prompt it again if we dislike it. And we need to be quite specific with that as well. So up to this point, let's assume that we're happy with this website, we're happy with this logo, we're happy with the rest of the stuff that Claude Code came up with. And you can see over here, it says open the Finder, you could do all of this stuff. And we've looked at the landing page, we've looked at the logo, we've basically looked at all of this as well. And let's just say, okay, I want to publish this website live for free just for 24 hours now, right? Because let's be real, I probably don't want to have this exact website live. I've actually been working on another website, which I've spent a bit more time working on. And in this case, it says, okay, go to drop.netlify.com. And this will be our first ever instance of actually shipping the product. So in this case, I'm skipping the secure parts because we'll be talking about security in a separate part of this course. But when it comes to shipping the actual product and making sure that it's live, this is what we're going to do. We're going to go to drop.netlify.com or whatever websites that basically Claude Code suggests. Over here where it says browse to upload, I'm going to click into that, and YouTube website walkthrough. And then over here, I should be able to select the file that I want to upload. So just give me a couple of seconds to do that. And you can see my HTML file over here. I've just dragged to upload it, and it basically says rename it to this. So I'm going to click on rename and deploy, and let's see what it comes up with. So it should just take a couple of seconds. And then now if we click into this website, it will always give us like a password, and the password is always my drop site, by the way. So you may want to change that. In this case, I'm just going to paste this password, and I'm going to click on submit, and we can see, voila, this website is now live. Of course, if we want to move it to Webflow, for instance, we can then go back into Visual Studio Code and say, I deployed it in Netlify, but how do I move it to Webflow forever, right? And based on that, you can see it's super conversational. You don't need to be an absolute nerd or super, super technical to speak to it. If I can do it, anyone can basically do it. So in this case, because all of my existing websites live inside of Webflow, it just basically tells me to go to Webflow, click on new project, blank site. And to be honest, I can probably do that, but it will just cost me a bit of money to add another website to my Webflow plan. So I'm not going to be doing it just yet. But you get the idea. 99% of this is just absolute common sense. And this all relies on us just following this checklist of items. So if we just recap what we've done so far, we've created a new folder, we've opened that folder, we've added the Claude.md and the planning phase files. We talked to Claude Code with like a summary of what we want done, preferably saving some time along the way as well, using a voice transcript tool. And typically that voice transcript tool would be something like Whisperflow. And based on that, after we gave it some goals, constraints, and all that fun stuff, we basically asked it to ask us some clarifying questions. And based on those clarifying questions, it went ahead and built the website for us. So there we are. There you have it. Here is how you can go and clone, mimic, and improve a competitor's website in just a matter of maybe 15 minutes or so. And it's a lot simpler than most people make it seem. And it's a lot simpler than having to go through the process of speaking to a freelancer or an agency that can build a website for you. And don't get me wrong, we haven't covered everything that when it comes to Claude Code, but we've covered how to plan your projects, how to build your projects. And there is a lot of smart stuff there that we've covered, which will help you along the way in any of your future projects using Claude Code. Very well, up to this point, we already covered how to plan the actual Claude project that we're working on, how to build it out in various phases, and we even touched on security and shipping and launching the project live. However, for the purpose of the next couple of minutes, I just want to take a step back and just give you one quick shortcut to make sure that your projects are as secure as possible. And worth noting, we'll be talking about this later on in the course as well. But for the time being, as we cover those 4 stages, I just don't want to skip the security step because it's something to be taken very, very seriously. So if you think about how companies will typically deploy code and launch a website or an app or something of that sort, typically it will involve 3 or 4 of these things. So first of all, it would require some general quality assurance checks. So this can be all sorts of various things, just making sure that the button actually works and that when you click the button, you get redirected to the right website. That will be the first thing. So quality assurance can basically encompass and include a lot of things in itself. The second thing, when we talk about security, is the reviewing of the code, just to make sure that the code does not contain any API keys, any of your login details, your email address, like your zodiac sign or whatever else it is that contains any sort of personally identifiable information. And you'd be surprised. Sometimes it happens by accident that for whatever reason, you drop your API key into the chat and all of a sudden it's at the top of the website, for instance, right? In worst, when AI hallucinates, obviously. And then finally, the third part, we'll touch on integrity briefly as well. And the main idea behind this, a lot of the time, there could be some sort of attacks on your website, for instance. So if you have a chat functionality on your website, sometimes there could be someone that just creates a bot and starts chatting with your chat. And obviously every message will cost you a couple of cents or something of that sort. And that way you can go broke pretty fast. So for the purpose of this, we need to make sure that we have one markdown file which has all the relevant prompts to perform quality assurance checks, code review, and just to make sure that, the integrity remains there. So like we don't have any API keys leaked or anything of that sort, and that security is all sorted. So essentially, I've built an MD file for you already, and I've used this. And in order for you to actually be able to use this file for yourself, you would just need to navigate over to this link in the checklist. And you can see inside of the checklist here, it says, make sure this skill is enabled before doing the 2 above steps. So just click into this skill. It will be this skill over here. Just make sure this is enabled in the top right-hand corner. And you can see this is literally written out by Claude themselves. So it's their skill in itself. And if you go to skill.md over here, you can read it for yourself and just make sure that, it's nothing malicious or anything of that sort. And in this case, assuming that that toggle is switched on, you can then go and download the MD file, which I will link here as well. And it's called secure.md. So if I double click into it, I should be able to read it now. And this is what it basically contains. It basically just talks about quality assurance and code review and how the AI should be able to perform quality assurance and code review checks in order to, make sure that there is functional completeness of the project before we wrap it up. And basically, just to take a step back here, all we need to do is just make sure that we upload that MD file into our folder. And then as soon as we upload it there, it will just mean that after we plan and after we build out the actual project, we can just say, hey, run secure.md for me. So in this case, I was actually waiting for this in order to get started. So I'll say run the secure.md file on this project to make sure that it is good to go, right? And it's as simple as that. And then over here, we'll select edit automatically. And then I'm just going to click on that toggle and it will basically go ahead and it will run all of the security checks, quality assurance, code review, and all that stuff. Worth noting that there is a lot more complexity to it because I'm not the voice of how to prevent any sort of attacks on your website or your AI products that you're building out inside of Claude Code, but this is just one entry-level practice that you could integrate in order to minimize the chances of you having your AI products exploited one way or another. Now, worth noting, after you incorporate those secure practices, such as the quality assurance checks and the code review, it's now about time that we shed a bit more light on how to actually go about shipping your exact AI product, be it a website, an app, or whatever else you have created up to this point. And this is about time to dive deeper into all the different deployment platforms that we can use inside of Claude Code. In the meantime, you can see on my screen just now, I ran the secure.md file and it already basically gave us the all clear on the website, and it made sure that the code is clean, that the security is on point, and that there is nothing for us to worry about inside of this specific website project. And as we start talking about the different deployment platforms, it's worth noting that you can always ask Claude Code, what are the different ways I can deploy my project? And then obviously in this case, we're just going to click on that. And then straight away over here, if we just switch over to plan mode again, you will now basically come up with all these different options like Webflow, Netlify, Visaul, GitHub, Cloudflare, and so on. In most cases, it will prompt you to the right solution. However, it's worth noting that 99% of the time, you'll be one of these 5 platforms that are on this visual that you can see in front of you on the screen right now. And typically, if you're building a website, the cheapest and best place to host it will be somewhere like Netlify or Visaul. If you've built an app with a database or some sort of login behind the scenes, you would probably combine Visaul together with Supabase. And for those of you that build something super technical where it requires a lot of scripts, APIs, a lot of automations, and something that requires a lot more code, in that case, your go-to will be Modal and Railway. Now, if you followed along with a build out of the website, I very much recommend you to check out Netlify and to actually try hosting your website on Netlify, because this is a platform that you will be using quite regularly, assuming that you're working on a lot of websites. And let's be real, the chances are most of the time we'll be working on large data sets, and for that we will need to create databases. So for that purpose, make sure that you check out Supabase, because Supabase is the best database that I've worked with, and I've tried all sorts like Airtable, spreadsheets, and all sorts of other databases. And the best part about Supabase is the fact that you can get quite far with just their free plan. So if I go to the Supabase website over here, you should be able to see that the $25 a month plan allows you to have over 100,000 records, which is pretty insane, right? And it gives you over 8 gigabytes of storage. And you can have up to 50,000 rows inside of a table for $0 a month as well. So go check out Supabase. It's super cool. Go check out Netlify if you're building websites. And of course, just keep some of these names in mind for the future. If I'm totally honest with you, I don't see many of you potentially creating a super heavy backend full server kind of environment with multiple services, heavy workloads, and a lot of deployment required. But if you do back yourself and you do need a heavy backend and full server environment, look no further than Railway and Render as well. And again, 99% of the time when it comes to deploying the platform, just make sure that you just switch this over from edit automatically over to plan mode and ask it for all the different options. And in most cases, just specify that you want it to be free, because of course, that way it'll give you the most cost-effective option. Oh, and just as we wrap up this section, after we've built out, secured, and now shipped our website, one thing that we need to not forget is to click the save button where it says open editors on the right-hand side over here, or you can click Command S or Control S on your keyboard, and that will also save all the progress inside of this specific folder that you've been working on so patiently with over the last couple of hours. And by the way, if you want the visuals for this entire course with most of the resources that I've covered so far, then do me a massive favor, go click that first link in the description down below underneath the video, and I guarantee you that you'll find all the resources there. So please do me a massive favor As you can probably tell by the quality of this video so far, I don't have an actual editor editing it. So I'm doing my best here by putting this all together. I'm spending 3 to 4 days filming this. So if you enjoy this video, if it added some value to you, just consider subscribing, like this video, and comment something nice down below as well, because that gets me through some of these tougher days when I'm filming for like 4 or 5 hours over a random weekend. Now it's about time that we level up our Claude Code skills. And we're going to build a CRM with a task management dashboard that we can use in-house in order to replace any sort of redundant tool in our tech stack, be it an expensive subscription to a tool like Jira, Notion, Asana, or any other pricey software subscription, so that you can finally be able to afford to join the free waitlist for my Unlock Courses subscription, which will be launching in just a couple of months from the time of me recording this video. Anyways, in order for us to build out a CRM, we can already use a lot of the files that have been created in the past folder that we've just used in order to build out the website. So specifically, we can use the Claude.md file, we can use the planning phase file, and the secure.md file from over there. So without further ado, all I'm going to do now is just head over into the actual previous folder where I've built my previous website with. I'm going to click into it, and then I'm going to duplicate it. And you should be able to see that now it says copy on it. So I'm just now going to click into it, rename it, and I'll call this CRM plus task management tool, and I'm going to double click into it, and I'm basically going to remove every single file that I don't want to have inside of that folder, apart from the Claude.md file that we used on the previous project to build out the website. I'm still going to keep the planning phase MD file as well. I'm going to keep the secure MD file, and I'm also going to keep my Unlock Courses logo so that I can make my CRM a bit prettier than my current CRM over here. So basically, for the purpose of this task, I'm just going to go through the checklist. So as you can see now, we've created a folder. The second thing that we need to do is we need to open that folder inside of the IDE of choice. So in this case, I'm going to go over here, going to click on Command O on my screen, and then I'm just going to select in desktop this new folder, which is the CRM and task management tool. And now I'm going to click on Open again. And for the purpose of this, you can see that it will again ask me for permissions. I'm going to say, yes, I trust the authors. Of course I do, because I am the author. And in this case, you can see Claude.md, planning phase file, secure file, and the logo. So for the purpose of this, I'm just going to click into the Claude logo over here, going to close a bunch of other tabs to avoid making this so overwhelming. And the first thing that I will typically do is just type in init. And no, this is not British slang. It's basically just a phrase in order for Claude to digest all of the files that we attached over here. So for the time being, let's give it some time to think. You can see it thought for a second, and then it just started reading all of these files. And as you can see right now, I also added the running of the init command to the checklist here as well, so we can remember to do that. And in the meantime, we added all of the files, we created the folder, we opened it inside of the IDE, and now it's about time that we start off by preparing a brief whilst this is still reading all of these MD files. So the first thing that we need to do is to switch the toggle over here from edit automatically over to plan mode. And right now I'm going to be super cool and use my Whisper Flow extension. So it just requires me to press one button and to speak at this fancy microphone, which set me back over $124 a year ago, but definitely worthwhile, better than me holding like a microphone like I used to with my hands, which was quite, labor intensive. But anyways, in this case, I'm literally just going to describe the functionalities of a CRM that I want to build. And I'm also going to describe how I want to migrate my existing CRM data into this CRM. So here it goes. I'm looking to build a CRM tool for my business, which enables me to segment leads based on the different courses that they have bought, based on whether they're a good fit for my done-for-you implementation, for my AI automations agency. And I want to have 5 different tabs inside of my CRM. So a company list tab, a contact list tab, a pipeline tab, a task management tab whereby I can assign tasks to different colleagues. And all of these tabs need to be interlinked, so I'm able to filter out contacts and companies and pipelines all through the same filtering mechanism. Now, I want the CRM to be super slick, super similar to the likes of HubSpot in terms of user experience. And I want to make it bright pink with a light blue touch as well, with a bit of white color to add to the mix too. So based on this, ask me a bunch of clarifying questions so we can make this a killer project together. And it's as simple as that, right? Plan mode, here we are, activated. Let's click into that button there. You will now read the files and ask us some clarifying questions. I hope you're honestly following along as well, because if you're just watching me do this on my own, it's probably not the best use of your time. I very much encourage that you put me in a separate window on your screen, or you have me on your iPhone, and then, you actually get involved and you do that on your laptop, because otherwise you're just going to get tons of watch time for me on YouTube, which I really, really appreciate. But at the same time, you're not really going to turn that theory into practice. And I know that sounds like super, super podcasty, but trust me, you really need to get your hands dirty, because it's been probably 90 minutes, 2 hours into the course video so far. And I very much encourage you to actually take that plunge and to just basically get on with it. In the meantime, over here, it's now asking us some clarifying questions. What tech stack do you want to use for this CRM? I always say recommended. I've actually got Next.js installed, which, by the way, it takes 2 seconds. You can actually get Claude Code to do it for you. And I've got a super base account, so I'm going to select that. Where does your lead source purchase data currently live? I'm just going to say other. It's scrambled across different CSV files, Google Sheets, HubSpot, Pipedrive, and a bunch of other places. I will be able to feed you a bunch of random CSV files, and I want you to turn this and to import this into my existing CRM. So there we are. Who will use this CRM? In my case, I'm going to say a small team of 2 to 10 people. And to be honest, it will be quite cool to do it with permissions as well. But for the purpose of this video, do I really need to worry about permissions? Let's just keep it at the small team, 2 to 10 people for the time being. And how do you want your sales pipeline structured? Fixed stages, Kanban board. I'm going to say customizable, submit answer. And based on this, I'm going to say, ask me more clarifying questions. And I don't know why I'm typing this, because I'm honestly not even making my money back for all of these voice AI dictation platforms that I'm using. So next time, please remind me and I'll actually speak at it, because otherwise I'm just not making the most of my $50 a month investment into the dictation tool. It says, what courses do you sell and how should contacts be segmented by them? I'll give you a list. How do you identify whether a lead is a good fit for your done-for-you AI automation service? I'd say qualification form checklist. That's probably the most relevant. What does task management need to support? Due dates, link to contacts, comments, reminders, other. And here I can just say a bunch of other things like priority level, reports to, assigned by, to make their job a bit more complicated. And where should this CRM be hosted? I would say inside of Visaul, and that's the platform that I mentioned probably about 10 minutes ago in this video. And it's really, really good for actually getting that CRM live, especially if you want to host it and share it with your team for permissions and that kind of thing. So you can see it's still thinking it's going to be asking you some other questions. And honestly, in my opinion, building a CRM is probably one of the highest value things that you could be doing using Claude Code, because think about the amount of money that it will save you. It will probably at least save you $20 a month. So you're basically substituting the investment into the CRM and into a task management tool, and you're substituting that with a cost of Claude Code itself. So you're basically breaking even for the month, right, with Claude Code, just by having a CRM in place. And that's not to mention that you can then go ahead and build all sorts of other cool, wacky stuff. Over here, it says, can you list your courses here? I'm just going to say other. I'm going to say unlock Clay, unlock NA10, unlock Clay for recruiters. Basically just add unlock to any other word, and that's how I come up with all of my courses. So I've got unlock LinkedIn, I've got how to sell B2B, which is based on over 4 years. Can you believe it? Over 4 years of B2B sales experience. I've got a course on how to sell B2B as well, and that's having closed over $1 million in revenue over the last couple of years alone, probably. How to sell B2B, and then on top of that, we'll also do Unlock Claude Code, and I'm about to launch Unlock Cursor as well. So that will be all separate courses. I'm sure you agree that that's really, really cool, right? Okay, next up, beyond basics, what fields do you need in a contact record? I'm just going to say other, add an option to add custom fields. And also whenever I import the CSV files, I want you to learn from these and basically adapt the CSV files, headers from the CSV files to match the formatting inside of the CRM. And by the way, the other option is actually really, really good. So in this case, I'm just going to click on enter. What are your done for you fit criteria? This become the checklist for each contact record. So I'd say it's probably basic stuff. We don't really do that. We have just one form. Okay, screw it, standard B2B criteria. Which of these external tools do you want your CRM to connect with? Whoa, are you mental? You're saying that I can connect my CRM to other tools as well? huge if true, right? Let's say Hey Reach and Smart Lead. I'm also going to say La Growth Machine because I've got a really, really cool account with them. Shout out to La Growth Machine, by the way. They're great partners of this YouTube channel. They basically enable you to send voice notes via LinkedIn messages. They enable you to send LinkedIn automated outreach, emails, you name it. You can probably just do that across a bunch of different channels all through one platform. And of course, on top of that, we want to integrate Gmail so we can email people directly from the CRM and we can like track their activity. And then let's click on submit answers because I don't want to go overboard with this, especially since, for context, whilst filming this video, I'm also cooking some dinner for myself and my girlfriend in the kitchen behind. And she's got an actual job, like she has to go to an actual office. So on Wednesdays, I have to treat her to a dinner at home. So, trying to make the most of multitasking this evening. Hopefully that deserves a like from you. So please like and subscribe to this channel in case I haven't asked you for that already. And over here it says, what information should a pipeline deal card track? I'll just say all of those because it's not that it's just tracks like one thing, right? How should task reminders and assignment notifications be delivered? Whoa, this is mental, right? I know that like we can set all of this up, but you just wouldn't expect that, all of a sudden you can have a pop-up notification on your Gmail from a random CRM that you've built through watching a random YouTube video, right? Anyways, beyond tab level filtering, what saved views or quick filters are most important to you? I'm just going to say all of these because honestly, like my brain is pretty cooked after working today. So I'm just going to click on submit answers. I'm going to type in all of them. La Growth Machine isn't in the current toolset. How critical is this integration to launch? I'd say add it later, submit answers, and voila. By now, we should be in a position where we've scoped out and planned this workflow so well that it should be just a matter of actually updating the Claude.md file and the planning phase file in order to adapt to this. So let's just have a look. Of course, it's shimmying and thinking in the meantime. And for the time being, we've went through explaining the project in plain English. A lot of the time, you don't really see me defining any constraints or any goals because this is all internal stuff, right? Like when I see something that it does wrongly, that's when I typically tell it like, hey, avoids the double dashes or whatever it is. But yeah, that's quite important. Project architecture tech stack, it recommends for us anyways. The clarifying questions is honestly the biggest thing whenever you're building out any sort of project. The Claude.md and the planning phase files are essential. So for that reason, I think, you're in a really good position if you use my Claude.md and planning phase files, because otherwise it will take you a while to come up with those on your own. So this must bring us nicely to review and approve the actual plan. So hopefully let's have a look over here. It's now asking us for more clarifying questions. Gosh, this AI is pretty smart. So we're going to go for Rose and Baby Blue over here. Roughly how many contacts? Under 1,000. Oh, that was wrong. But anyways, we can fix it later. How often will you import new data? I'd say one-time bulk import, or like, let's say recurring imports, just so that it's a bit easier so that it can basically have that importing functionality. And let's give it some time to think as well. And the best part now is the fact that Claude Code just said, I have everything I need. Let me write the implementation plan now. And don't ask me how many times it took me to pronounce the word implementation without having a little speech impediment in the middle of the sentence. Anyways, let's give it some time to think. In the meantime, I'm going to go and grab some more water that I'm about to run out of. Okay, in this case, on the right-hand side, you can see that it has opened up an implementation plan. It gives you some context. It gives you the exact tech stack, the brand colors, the schema, which I believe is just the different headers that you will see inside of the CRM. It also gives you the project structure. So this basically just means that on the left-hand side over here, you should be able to see all of these random files, I think. I'm not actually sure what this is, but it looks pretty convincing. And let's be real, like worst comes to worst, you can just ask it to reverse the changes. And then more than that, it gives us some of this stuff, some CSV import stuff, different courses and different tags, the done for you checklist, the integrations with different tools, which I'm still blown away by. Notifications as well, which is pretty cool. Implementation phases, phase 1, phase 2, phase 3, and so on. And by the way, one of the major reasons for you to use that Claude.md file that I'm sharing with you and this planning phase MD file as well is because that way you build out the actual project in 3 phases or in multiple phases. And that means that instead of you trying to swallow a burger all in one bite, instead we're breaking it down into little digestible chunks, which makes AI less likely to hallucinate, and it also makes us look a lot smarter at the end of the day when we're able to complete the project. You can see basically the entire implementation stuff over here. Of course, I could converse with it, similar to how you would chat with like an AI agent somewhere else. But for the time being, I have no choice. It's 6:40 in the evening. I just want to have a relaxing evening and watch a bit of Netflix. So let's just click on yes and auto accept, and let's let it do its magic. And by the way, right now it will give us a bunch of to-dos over here. So this is the checklist that Claude Code is going through. This is another reason that I love my Claude.md files and my planning phase files as well, because it basically just enables us to structure the project in a nice visual way. And now it asks us to allow this bash command. And super simply put, whenever it requests for any sort of bash commands to be allowed, it's just basically asking to perform some activity on your behalf. And of course, in this case, I'm going to say, yes, allow for this specific project. What this will mean is that you only allow the permission on a local level, meaning that you're just allowing it for this specific project that we're working on. But if you press on yes, it will allow that on other projects in the future as well. So that's one way that you can basically give too many permissions. So for the time being, I'm going to be quite tight and I'm going to select the second option. And don't worry, if you want to learn a bit more about the different permission levels and all that stuff, I kept it for the more boring final part of the course when we talk about security, because let's be real, that's not something that will get you a dopamine spike, and that's not something that will get you out of bed tomorrow to continue watching the course. So for the time being, we'll just focus on this. In the meantime, I'm going to again allow that permission for Next.js, and let's just give it some time to load. Again, I'm going to give it permission for this bash command, and you get the idea. The next 10 minutes or so typically is just you giving permissions one by one. And at some point, you will just give in with the permissions, because at some point it will just ask you, do you want to give this permission again? And you will just click on the first option, which is yes, which will give them basically unlimited power to just basically self-approve all of this stuff. So let's just see how that turns out. In the meantime, it's still tinkering, unraveling, and thinking. So let's give it a bit of time. And whilst this was loading, I've already chopped some salad. I'm not sure if you can actually see it, but just thought to bring it over here as well. So for the time being, I'm just going to click on yes, because I'm tired of accepting all of these tiny little permissions all the time. And this should mean that it's a bit more self-sufficient, and it can basically just run and create that CRM for me before asking some final clarifying questions. So basically, I'm not going to include the next 5 or 10 minutes of this actual build out, but all it will require is for me to click on yes non-stop like an absolute maniac. So let's give it a couple of seconds. All right, guys, we have now planned the CRM. We've basically given it the go ahead in order to build the actual CRM out for us. And you can see over here, basically, it ran overnight in my case. As you know, I was cooking. So basically, every couple of hours, I just kept on asking it questions like, oh, is it still running? How long left? Is it still running? Because I was just trying to make sure that, it was still running in the background whilst I was doing all that stuff. So that's one thing I recommend you do. But also bear in mind that it doesn't actually know how long is left in most cases. So it can just give you estimates. So in this case, it said 90 minutes, but I think it took like 3 or 4 hours, because by the time that this was done, it was probably already like 1 a.m. or 2 a.m. And hence I'm just filming this the next morning. And then once it's all done, you can then basically ask it to run the secure.md file to make sure that it goes through the quality assurance checks and all that good stuff. For the time being, I think this has already been done, so I'm not going to bore you by just giving it that prompt, but it's as simple as you just saying, hey, go look at the secure.md file and make sure that you do all the relevant quality assurance checks before giving me the go-ahead in order to deploy this CRM for us. And then after that, I said, okay, cool, like tell me how to deploy this. And in this case, it just came up with the instructions. So it said like set up Supabase. So I went over to supabase.com. And if I just show you over here, if you create an account with Supabase, it'll be completely free. If you go into project overview on the left-hand side somewhere here, you should be able to create a new project. So if we just go back for a second, you can always click on new project over here, and then you can just give it a name. In my case, I'm already up to 2 free projects. So it's asking me to upgrade, but the first 2 projects will be completely free. And after you click on new project, you should be able to see your project over here. And if you click into it, it will then give you the next steps over here. So for example, it says, once created, go to SQL editor and run the contents of this, right? So in this case, I'll show you where the SQL editor is. It's on the left-hand side of the panel over here. But to be honest, I don't really remember how I did it last time. So I'm literally just going to show you the exact process that I've used last time, just so that you see like how to. So I have basically just screenshotted this entire page, and then and now I'm basically just going to upload it over here and say, hey, I'm stuck here. Where do I now action the stuff in the SQL editor, right? And I understand that you might be thinking like, why are you showing us all of this boring stuff? Like, I just want to get, maximum value per minute of this video. But the reality is most of the time you will be stuck. And all you basically need to understand is that in this case, you will basically just try and guide you through all the steps. So it says click initial CRM schema setup. So let's have a look. So that's on the left-hand side over here. Then it mentions over here, I can see you're already in this view. Click this setup in the left sidebar. That looks like it's already saved there. Click it, then click run. So now I just basically said, hey, it's not working. Am I doing something wrong? And it just basically said, hey, like select all the existing text in the editor, delete it, and then just paste all of this instead. So I'm just going to copy this to clipboard. I'm going to go back here, delete the existing text, paste that one that they recommended, click on run. And then based on that, it should give me a success, no rows returned over here. And then going forward now, I'll say, this works. What next? Right? And it should basically just give me some more code or whatever to put there. And then in this case, it just said to create a new tab. So you'll just click on the plus over here. And then here we go again. We're just going to copy the clipboard once again. And you can see right now we're like pasting, I think, like different pipeline stages and other stuff. So I've just pasted it here. I'm going to click on run. It'll give me success all over again. And then now I'm saying, what next? And it's basically the same as you just speaking to a nerdy technical friend of yours, apart from sometimes, it's not able to actually perform stuff on your behalf. Then next, it just says, hey, go to project settings and API. So in this case, this will take a bit of time to figure out where that is. But if we go back to the CRM project and we click into that over here, and if we scroll somewhere down here, we should be able to see the API details. Or if not, I'm just going to go into project settings at the bottom. And if I click into API keys, we can now click on new publishable key, I believe. I'll just call this Tim Y 2.0 CRM. And then I'm going to create a publishable key. And in this case, it just has to be a lowercase name. So I'm going to just do that. And here we are. It gave me an API key. And by the way, I'll be changing that API key by the time that I finish the recording of this part of the video. And for this next part, it now says, hey, go to project settings and to the APIs, and then go grab your project URL and your anonymous public key as well. So for that, we'll go to integrations in the bottom left-hand corner. And then if we go into project settings, actually, we should be able to see API keys. And all I want you to do is just to create a new publishable key, which is super simple. You just give it a name and a description, and the same thing for the secret key as well. And I know I'm revealing my API keys right now. I'll be deleting that. This is just like a test account I'm running anyways. And in this case, I'm just going to copy this API key for the publishable key, and I'm going to copy and paste the secret key as well. So let's just give it a couple of seconds, and I'll basically be doing that in the background, and then I'll show you the next steps from here. By the way, guys, later on in the course, we'll cover this in more detail, but for the time being, whenever it asks you for project keys or any sort of API keys or anything of that sort, it's the same as you giving AI your passwords, right? Needless to say, you don't want to have a trace of your API keys in the chat over here because it's not secure. Because if anything goes wrong, you don't know who will get access to this. So what I recommend instead is if you click into the actual project over here, and if you look into it over here, you should be able to see that there is a .env file hiding somewhere. So if I go back into this folder, right, as an example, if I click into the CRM, I should be able to see the .env local example file. And this is a file which contains all of your passwords, all your logins, all your API keys. And this is just like a nice private way to basically host this locally on your computer. So only you will have access to your passwords and API keys, and you can still use it for your conversations with Claude Code. So in this case, what I've done so far is I basically created a markdown file. And of course, if you want to, you could probably use like ChatGPT or something to create that markdown file for you. I copied and pasted the actual API keys for Supabase, so you can see it. I'm just going to expand my screen here so you can see it well. Just give me a second. Over here, Supabase keys, right? And what I'm going to do now is I'm going to drag this file into this CRM and task management part, just so that it just lives somewhere close inside of that folder. So just give me a second. I'll just awkwardly drag it across. So you can see right now that I've added the Supabase keys MD file into just like no folder over here at the top, right? And if I click into the CRM folder, I should now be able to basically just drag it into that CRM section. And for the time being, that's going to be safer than you just basically giving it directly into the chat with Claude Code. So in this case, you're just basically going to now say, I added a file titled Supabase Claude.md for you, where it says Superbase _keys, and you can see it's already looking at it at the bottom here because it's the newest file that just got uploaded. For you to see with the API keys, let me know next steps for deployment. And now it's asking you whether you're giving it permission to read those files. In this case, if you say yes, it may take this as precedent for the future. So for the time being, I'm just going to say yes, but just in this specific instance, because I don't want it to always have access to that file. You can see on top of that, it's asking for the project URL. So that should be pretty straightforward to find. So all we're going to do is head into the actual project overview. And then you can see over here, CRM 2.0, we can just basically copy the project URL over here by clicking into it. And then I'm just going to paste it over here because I think it's completely fine to share the project URL. It's also asking for the anonymous public GAWT key. It should be a very long string starting with EYJ. So we can basically just head back into the Superbase account. And if you head back into the settings, you should be able to go to the JWT section and create standby key. And then you can just click on create standby key over here and you should be able to see it in front of you over here. So all it requires for you is to just basically click into it and then click on view key details and then paste it back. And on top of that right now, it also mentions that now we're still missing the API keys, and it's saying right now that we're still missing the anonymous keys. So in that case, if we're missing that, just head into the this part of the panel over here where it says API keys inside of the settings, click into legacy anonymous keys, and then over there, as soon as you click into it, you should be able to copy and paste that key and add it to that MD file with all the Superbase URLs. If you're also following along with the video, one thing that may give you an error as you try to follow along is whenever you click into your CRM project, if you head over into project settings, the API key you need to paste not from just the publishable key part over here, but also from this tab over here, which will give you your anonymous API key on the right-hand side over here. I'm not going to click into it because that way you can see another API that I would need to replace after filming this video. So essentially, after that's done, you just need to feed all of those keys into that folder, right? Which is, in my case, called the Superbase passwords MD folder. And in that case, after you're done with that, you just basically converse with Claude Code. In my case, I just said, hey, I want to get it live. Tell me what needs to happen. And it basically just gave me a bunch of different commands. And of course, I can build this out. Probably it'll take another 20 minutes of back and forth. I don't really want to show it to you because it's basically just me asking common sense questions of oh, hey, I'm stuck. How do I do this, right? But it will basically just guide you through that process. It may tell you, oh, hey, copy and paste this command into the terminal. And then you'll paste that command into the terminal. It will run. It will install the relevant app or whatever. And then towards the end of that process, you should have a fully functioning CRM. Now, afterwards, over here, it says, hey, I think everything is live and fully deployed. Here is your CRM. So now I'm going to click into the CRM. However, in order for us to log into this beautiful looking CRM, what we need to do is head into our project over here and make sure that we have a login for that project, because remember that Superbase is the place where we will store all the passwords and all the logins for all the members. So on the left-hand side of the panel here, if you click into authentication, you should be able to see that there are no users right now. So if we click on add user in the top right-hand corner over here, I'm going to click on create new user. I'm going to type in my own email, and then I'm going to give a quick password, and I'm going to select a password, which I believe is secure. And then based on that, I'll just create this as a new item inside of one password. I'll call this Tim's CRM 2.0. Right, I'm going to save it, and voila, now we have created a user. So in this case, this is the first time that I actually check out this CRM. So I'm basically got the email address at the top and I've got a password at the bottom. I'm going to now click into sign in, and we should hopefully be able to sign in straight away. So let's just click into that. All right, guys, so in order for us to actually get the CRM live, all it took was for me to converse with Claude Code over the last 10 minutes or so and to just share the API keys for Superbase, and then more than that, to basically ask it for instructions for how to deploy the CRM live on Visaul. And the reason that I'm deploying it live before even seeing it in the first place is because, in my opinion, it's just a matter of shipping the product fast, and then after that, you can just iterate and you can continue talking to Claude Code and telling it what to change, even though the CRM is already live. So in this case, you can see on the left side of the panel, we have the contact section. So if I click on add contact, you should be able to see that we can fill in their first name, last last name, email address, phone number, LinkedIn profile, all the typical stuff. You've got the courses over here as well, so what courses they bought. By the way, go check out the courses. They will be linked underneath this video somewhere as well. You also have how good of a fit they are for my done-for-you services when it comes to like implementing Clay.com, NA10, any sort of like outbound or automation-related services. And on top of that, you've got this cool filtering mechanism where you can filter based on the course that they are basically buying. More than that, you can add companies. You also have this pipeline stage where you have like all the different pipeline stages, and you can basically just drag and add new deals, which is really cool. And then more than that, you have tasks over here as well. So you can see all the tasks that are open, done, and so on, right? And more than that, you've got an upload section whereby you can drag and drop all of the contacts over here. And worth noting that this is like quite a sophisticated CRM. You could have built something a lot simpler, which would have taken like just a bit shorter in terms of time. And then you can filter based on courses, pipeline stages. You can customize like the team icons. So you can invite colleagues. You can create custom fields as well, which is really, really cool. And if you ask me, for someone like myself who has no engineering background or anything of that sort, you know, this would not have been possible like a year ago or so, right? So, you know, very impressive to say the least. The way that it typically works is at this stage, I would probably just import all of my contacts and all of the companies from my previous CRM over here. And I'll basically play around with this. On top of that, if you want to do it a bit differently, you could just import all the CSV files into Claude Code, and it will then import them and like consolidate all the different fields and so on, and clean it up for you. And then it can just import contacts and companies and the pipeline as well on your behalf. So that's basically that. And this brings us to the end of this CRM setup process, whereby by the end of this, I hope you've created a CRM. You've also created a task management like ability within your CRM, so you can add a task. You can then assign like a priority. You can assign it to a team member, and you can basically just do all of this fun stuff over here, which is really, really cool. And if you told me that this was possible like a year ago, or even like a couple of months ago, I would have been like, no way, this is absolutely insane. Okay, guys, we have already covered how to build a website using Claude Code, how to set up a CRM and task management tool and launch it live. And not to mention the fact that we already went through all the boring setup steps for the terminal, Claude Code, Visual Studio Code, and so on. Right now, in the next part of the course, I want to talk about two things. We'll start off by talking about go-to-market and what a lot of people refer to as GTM engineering, which right now is changing really, really fast given the introduction of Claude Code and given the fact that Clay.com has increased their pricing quite a lot, literally this month when I'm recording this video. And more than that, later on in the course, I'll be touching on how Claude Code has reshaped the three main parts of my agency business, specifically talking about how it has reshaped client acquisition, client onboarding, and client service delivery. And I think this will be really, really useful for any of you guys that want to stay on top of the Claude Code and AI trends and to adjust to them and to adapt to them, especially given that, you know, a lot of other tools are increasing their prices, and Claude Code seems to be this new tool that makes our lives so much easier. So for the time being, though, let's jump into the concept of go-to-market. And the first thing that I want to touch on is the definition of go-to-market. Based on my understanding, go-to-market is just the process of creating a strategy, short-term and long-term, for introducing your product or service to the market via a mix of inbound and outbound sales, right? So simply put, it's just you planning and preparing your inbound and outbound motion in order to get customers for your business, right? So in this case, these are the 10 steps that we typically take when it comes to planning go-to-market on behalf of a lot of startups that we work with right now. At the time of me recording this, we've got 13 active clients with my agency B2B Boosted. I run 7 of those clients solo, and I've got a couple of colleagues that run the rest of the clients right now as well. And we implement tools like NA10, Clay, and we partially use Claude Code right now, but to be totally honest, mainly 80% of the job right now lives inside of Clay, 20% inside of NA10, and then Claude Code is just supplementary for data enrichment, qualification, and a bit of email personalization as well. So anyways, as we jump into this, we've already defined what GTM engineering is. Now I'm going to walk you through the 10 steps of go-to-markets that typically most sales teams would complete before starting any sort of automations. Because before you can even consider using a tool like Claude Code, you need to understand what would you do manually in the first place, because that's what we're trying to mimic and replicate inside of Claude Code, right? So the first thing is the data intake, because the chances are, if you're like 99.9% of companies, you have a lot of data. So you have a lot of scrappy CSV files with contact data. You probably have your old school CRM, which is probably somewhat outdated. You ran some campaigns in the past via a bunch of different channels like LinkedIn and emails. You probably have some client feedback, some customer success notes. You may even have notes from past sales calls. So for example, just before this, I was going through my Fireflies note taker channel. So you can see over here, like I've got a channel with Fireflies, which is an AI note taker. It basically populates this Slack channel with the overview, the notes from the call, the next steps as well, like the action items. And basically that way we can then ask Claude, because we connected it using an MCP. And don't worry, an MCP is something that I'll introduce you to towards the later part of this course as well. And then after that, I can ask it questions like this, like, hey, look at my past 5 done for you calls from Fireflies and tell me what were the recurring headaches amongst the people that I spoke to. And my done for you calls are basically any calls with prospects that are looking for done for you claim implementation services. So in this case, these are all the overarching themes. And based on this, I can then create messaging, and it gives me a bit more inspiration for future outbound and inbound stuff that I'm running. So what I'm trying to say with the first step, it sounds really, really intuitive, but all we need to do is just write down every single data source where we currently have data, whether that's a Google Doc, a spreadsheet, any sort of random sticky note, anything of that sort, and combine all of that into one single source of truth, which could either be in the form of a CRM, similar to the one that you've just built before this, or alternatively, you can just unify it all inside of a spreadsheet. So typically, for some of our clients that don't have CRMs, we just create a spreadsheet that looks something like this. We basically just label all the tabs. We give a rough idea of like what the companies or people are in those tabs, and then we consolidate them all into one master directory. And in that master directory, we just have like all the inputs that are required, like your company name, company website, company page, all of this boring stuff. And then we'll just basically import all of that into one file. And that'll be the one file that consolidates all of the company data and all of the contact data. And we use it as one database that we can use similar to a CRM. Because realistically speaking, like, good luck doing any sort of outreach or any sort of inbound or outbound in the long term if you don't even know who you contacted in the past. So you need to start off with that CRM piece. And if your data is a mess, you just need to have some sort of CRM, whether it's completely improvised, it would be like a spreadsheet like this, but you just need to unify all of that data, right? Because that way you can see who your existing customers are. And we'll talk about lead list building like in 6 steps from now. But still, before we can approach anything like lead list building or messaging or anything of that sort, we need to make sure that all of that data is consolidated. As a second step then, I've recorded like a 30-minute video on this before, but the second step typically is to define your total addressable market and to segment it into service available markets. Now, a lot of you would be thinking like, why are you saying all of this like boring terminology? Why are you throwing at me? And to be honest, like having done a university degree for 3 years, it was a complete waste of my time, because like it was just literally like terms like this that they threw at us, and you don't really, like, yes, you can learn it, but the only way that you learn these concepts properly is by like working and actually, getting your hands dirty and like putting this into practice. And in this case over here, I really want you to understand the definitions before we can actually like talk about automating all of this freaky stuff together, right? So essentially, when we talk about a total addressable market, this is your total addressable market. It's every single company in existence that you can potentially serve, right? So that's your total addressable market. Now, the second thing, and like if I just go back over here for a second, because it defines a lot better, it says over here, it's assuming that you achieve 100% market share. So this will include customers like, I don't know, Tesla or Facebook or Apple or whatever, right? So whenever people say, like we need to define our total addressable market, it's already the wrong terminology, right? Like you shouldn't care about your total addressable market, because that's every company in existence. You're not going to go and sell to like the bakery shop that's just downstairs here, right? Like that's not your target market, right? So you're not looking for the total addressable market. What you're looking for is service available markets. And that's the segment of the total market that you can realistically sell to based on things like geography, specialization, whether they're like B2B or B2C, based on the industry and so on, right? So first of all, let's get the definition straight. What we're trying to sell to is the SAM, right? The service available market, right? Not the TAM, because this is just like a distraction and this is just like the wrong terminology. And I know I'm getting like really granular and it's like tiny little details, but it's very important, right? So that's the first thing that we need to understand. Then, so this is how it works. You have your TAM, you have your SAM, and then you have your SOM. The SOM is not particularly important because it's like the part of the service available market that you can realistically convert. But for the time being, we just need to define the service available market. Typically, the way that you define your service available market is by picking the industries, breaking them down into sub-industries. So in this case, if I just draw this really quickly, let's say this is your SAM, right? We want to break down the SAM into tiny little segments, right? So this is your service available market, and we're breaking this down into all of these tiny little segments. And each segment could be defined by any of these criteria that I'm going to be talking to you about right now. So first of all, sub-industries. For example, if you're selling into financial services, you may break this down into fintechs, physical banks, issuers of credit cards, and so on, right? Of course, you can break it down based on customer size, like solopreneur or like one-man band kind of firms versus small and medium businesses versus startups versus mid-market companies or enterprise clients. You can break it down based on that because depending on the level of maturity of the company, they will have a different need, right? You can break it down based on geographies, you know this already, and problem solved. And I think this one is really, really underrated because typically with a lot of products, for example, like I was working for a fintech called Claude in the past. And in our case over there, because that was super early days, like right now they completely niche down towards like Africa and China route for payments. But back then we were just hypothesizing about the pain points, and we basically split our service available market based on the problems that our product solved. So we just have like some industries that would go after for transaction fees, where like the transaction fees were like super, super high in those industries. Some where exchange rates were the biggest problem, long payout periods, multi-entity reporting, and so on. And the main idea behind this is that way, whenever you reach out to a certain sub-industry, you have a specific pain points that you're like trying to scan for and you're trying to validate, right? And then only after you segment your service available market based on a mix of these different segmentation methods, only at that point, for each segment and for each sub-industry, we then create a certain persona. So for instance, if I show you here, say we're selling into education, the different segments could be like K-12 schools, higher education test prep. And for each one of those segments, you will be selling to a different persona, right? Because in K-12 schools, you'll probably be selling into principals. In test prep, you might be selling to deans of admissions. But if you're selling into corporates, for instance, you might be selling to chief of staff or chief HR officer or whatever the fancy title is, right? So that's the first couple of steps that we need to understand when it comes to go-to-market. So if I go back to this diagram here, which we were originally looking at, the first step is data intake. You need to consolidate all of that data, and you need to understand like what data already exists, because you don't want to basically be reaching out to people that you already contacted that are existing clients or anything of that sort. You then define your service available market and segment it into like different digestible chunks based on that filtering criteria that I mentioned. And when you go through these two steps, you should be able to guesstimate the number of contacts that are in your service available market, right? If it's less than 15,000 contacts, you will be going for a small SAM approach, right? So in other words, if your service available market is less than 15,000 contacts, you probably would want to do a lot of multi-channel outreach. So in that case, we'll talk about that in a second, but it will just require a different approach to you having a larger service available market, right? And then based on that, we talked about this already, you then map out the segments, to the personas, to the problems. I've got some examples over here that I've added as well. So again, you could just read through those inside of the guide. But spoiler alert, I'm not going to give this guide to anyone who is not a part of the Unlock Courses community, because honestly, this takes like tens of hours for me to create all of these concepts. Yeah, it just takes a lot of time. So if you want to get hold of such resources, you know where to go. I'll make sure to link Unlock Courses, Unlock Clay, and a bunch of other courses underneath, top link in the description down below. But essentially, after we go through some of these steps that we talked about already, and after we're at a point where we know the service available market, we understand like if it's large or if it's small, that's when the next part over here comes into play. That's when we already know the segments and the personas and the problems. And this is when we start talking about messaging, right? And every single message is just a matter of like the angle or the framing that you apply to the message. So what I mean by that is typically you're going to use one of 7 persuasion tactics inside of your messages. The first tactic that you may choose to use is otherwise known as lead magnets, whereby you're trying to give first and you're trying to provide upfront value. So typically this is through providing some sort of insights, fixes, audits, reports, case studies, or anything of that sort that may be educational for the prospect. I will also be adding examples of that inside of this guide so that you can have a look at some emails that we have sent on behalf of a digital marketing agency. Recently, we got them over 30 something sales opportunities within the first 3 months of working together. And that was just based on this like give first mentality, where we just basically created like 30-page reports, which were Claude Code generated. And each report basically was sent to a chief marketing officer at their specific like ICP company, saying like, hey, here is how your company compares to those top 3 competitors in AI searches. So whenever people search for like best to make up 2026, this is how you compare to your top 3 competitors, right? Just as an example. Now, the second kind of persuasion tactic in messaging is micro commitments. So this is typically when you say something like, hey, I recently scraped a database with over 30,000 companies that have received funding in the last 365 days. Can I send it to you? Simply reply yes, and I'll send it to you. And if you know that for whatever reason, like the chief revenue officer or the sales rep or whoever you're sending this information to, if you already know that they would be interested in that data point, and after they reply, you may want to give them a call and then just see if they're interested in any sort of lead generation services, for instance, just to make sure that they can actually reach out to those ICP companies that you share with them. Then all of this other stuff when it comes to messaging, like adding social proof, making sure that you have some sort of like authority by sharing like past results and successes. Of course, that's common sense, and just creating like a sense of scarcity. I know like all of this stuff would sound like common sense, and I've actually got an example library of positive replies, and these are all emails that I've sent in the past which got positive replies. So you can see over here, like it's got the actual reply of the person, and it's actually got like the exact message that was sent out. So if you find that useful, I'm going to add probably over 50 or 60 positive replies from just the last month alone, just as I go through all of my smart lead, like growth machine and instant lead campaigns. So if you want to take me up on that, you know where to find it. And typically when we go through these initial stages and we already hypothesize about the problems, the messaging, the segments that we're going after and so on, only at that point can we then start by sourcing companies and enriching companies and qualifying those companies. So what I mean by that, typically you may go to a database like Prospeo, right? So if I log into my Prospeo account over here, my bet is that most of you guys are still going into a database like this one. You're filtering for the right kind of companies based on location, headcount, and so on. And that's basically you sourcing the data on a company level, right? And then similarly over here, you can also source data on a people level as well. And if you think about what you do manually, after you source those companies, you then enrich them. So for example, some companies may not say whether they're B2B or B2C. So you may enrich to see if that company is B2B or B2C, and that'll be the first step, and then you would qualify that company. So for example, we only want to work with B2B companies, so we're going to screen out B2C companies. So that's typically step 5 of go-to-market. Based on those segments that we clarified, based on the kind of problems and messaging and other filtering criteria that we went through, and based on these other filtering criteria, this is the kind of list of companies that we want to pull into our initial outreach. So this could be things like revenue, tech stack, and so on, right? So for that, the first step is sourcing the companies, then you enrich them, then you qualify them to make sure that they're the right fit. And then after you've got the companies and you've qualified them and you've enriched them, that's typically when you start sourcing contacts. Now, in some cases, you may just skip the companies part and jump in for the contacts directly, but you need to be a bit more careful because that way you haven't pre-qualified the companies where these contacts work at. So it's a lot cheaper a lot of the time to just source the companies first, enrich and qualify them, and only then source the contacts from the desired ICP companies. And you go again here, you enrich them, you qualify them, and then you personalize any sort of outreach based on the messaging and the problems and the personas that we talked about earlier. Now, here is the good news. There are only 5 different types of data sources that you need to know how to use in order to source 99% of lead lists. The first type of data that you need to be aware of is LinkedIn-based data. And what I mean by that, it's basically any sort of database like Cognism, ZoomInfo, Apollo, Prospeo, or AI Arc, for instance, that's basically goes out there and scrapes LinkedIn. And every single platform that's I just mentioned, all they basically do is they have a crawler that goes on LinkedIn, it pulls up the job titles, it scrapes them, puts them in a nice looking database, right? So in this case, if your ICP contacts hang out on LinkedIn, you basically go to one of these providers, right? And you basically use that database view in order to filter for the right contacts. And this is something that we will automate using Claude Code later on throughout this course, right? So this is the first type of data that we will be using 80% of the time, especially if you're running some sort of lead generation agency that sells to typical B2B audiences. The second type of lead list tools that we need to be aware of is the lookalike category. And these are the tools that basically find you lookalike companies and lookalike contacts. So for example, let's say you already work with Nike, it will basically give you similar websites in terms of the websites of competitors. For example, it will give you the websites of Adidas.com, New Balance, Reebok, and a bunch of other competitors as well. So you can basically reach out to lookalike companies and lookalike people as well. Because let's say you work with a VP of marketing at Anthropic, it will give you the VP of marketing over at Gemini or any sort of other competitor, right? So this is the second type of category that you need to be aware of. And this is best for whenever you input a few companies and you want to find similar ones, right? Or when you input some contacts and you want to find similar ones. The third category is most important whenever you want to go after local businesses and you want to scrape local businesses using Google Maps. So typically you could be using tools like Serpa, OpenMart, or Apify. And by the way, I've got videos on all three of those and how you can use those, how you can plug them into clay.com, and how you can basically scrape those lists. And that's excellent for local businesses, I mentioned, so like your roofing companies, your dentists, your barbers, or whoever you want to reach out to. And this is really, really good for service-based businesses, right? Like that are local. So the fourth type of data that we want to pull into any lead list is things like government sites, associations, member directories. So these are typically like very custom scraping requests when you need to scrape like a random directory. So if I just like type in like construction equipment association directory, and if I go into this random directory that I didn't even know existed, in this case, you can see we've got all of these companies, right? And we may want to scrape them. In this case, you may be quite good with a tool like Instant Data Scrape in this case. And you can see it just basically scrapes all of these companies directly alongside their websites within just a couple of seconds, right? And this is where the fourth category of custom scraping comes in. And just spoiler alerts, the reason I'm talking to you about all of this is because you can use Claude Code to connect all of these tools into Claude Code to basically do all of this stuff for you, depending on whether you want to scrape a custom directory or if you want to scrape LinkedIn or something of that sort. And worth noting that with these custom directories and databases and custom forms of scraping, there are a lot of AI coding tools like Cursor, Claude, scraping extensions like Instant Data Scraper that you can use for that. And by the way, I've got a really good video on how to use Instant Data Scraper, which will be linked inside of this guide that you will get if you're part of my paid community or if you're inside one of the paid courses. And then on top of that, the fifth category is AI agents. For context, like there are some ones called like Parallel, Manus, Exa that a lot of folks, especially in the Clay ecosystem, are using right now. And the main benefit of this is you feed it examples. So for example, I could say like, hey, we work with B2B Boosted, and AI will find similar companies based on like similar patterns that it chooses. And it's good for something that's super, super niche or hard to find. So for example, yesterday I was using that for like finding not chocolate manufacturers, but like for artisan chocolate manufacturers or something like that. Like we have a really weird client who sells into that space. So that was quite fun to do. And you can discover new segments automatically. And it basically just applies more custom logic than like a human can actually bother to apply when finding similar companies. So this is just basically taking like lookalike tools to the next level. And it's a more complex setup. It requires a lot of like budget control and just you validating that what it does is not a bit of an overkill. And it's really good for very niche markets. So that's that. The reason I'm saying this, as I mentioned already, is because now that we're aware of these 5 different categories, we basically just need to create a project inside of Claude Code that can basically determine which one of these 5 sources to use. And then we just give it an API key, and it basically goes and does all the filtering. And basically that should make our life a lot easier. Okay, so let's just take a step back for a second. Essentially, what I've said so far is we collect a bunch of data, and in case if we're running like a lead generation agency or any sort of agency, you will typically collect all of that data using the Fireflies note taker calls with the client or with the prospects. You would also usually get a bunch of data through some sort of client onboarding form being filled in by the client. After that, based on this form, you can then segment the different service available markets, decides the path that you're taking, whether you have a larger service available market or a smaller one. And then this is typically when you triangulate the segments, the persona, and the problem. So that's just a fancy way of saying like, hey, you need to create the different segments, the different personas, the different problems. You think of different angles for the messaging. You would source the companies, you will source the contacts. A lot of the time, only after you source the contacts, only then after looking at some of the profiles, only then you can create different messages. So this is the next step over here, which is step number 7, when you create different types of messaging. And in this case, you have 5 or 6 different options when it comes to copywriting. And I will include those inside of this guide as well. So the first option you have is using a tool like Twain.ai, which basically does personalized outreach. The second option you have is using Octave Headquarters, which is, again, an AI copywriting tool. There is also a tool called AutoBound, I believe, and it basically does AI copywriting as well. Or alternatively, you can use custom GPTs. You can use Claude Code to generate personalized copy, but it really takes some time for you to train it up. And I'll show you how to do that later on in this course as well. And basically that's that. Like, it's just a matter of you adapting the message and making sure that this specific segment, this specific persona can resonate with the message that you're sending. Typically, this is when you then try to test some sort of message market fit. So in this case, I'm just attaching some screenshots, and these are basically examples of some campaigns that we're running for clients right now. So you can see, like in this case, like the first 5 campaigns can fall flat, but then campaign number 6 is getting like 3 positives. Campaign number 7 in this case was getting like 42 positives, I believe, over here. So it just shows that the main idea behind this is when you test different segments, you want to test the actual subject line. Probably in most cases, you want to test the opening line, so like the preview that someone sees when they just read your email or your LinkedIn message, when they see it in their inbox, like what they read. You want to test the offer, you want to test the lead magnets that you're sending, or the call to action. And the main thing is the or, so that, in other words, we're just testing one specific element in isolation rather than like testing all 5 things at the same time, because that will make all of these tests completely silly and useless. And we want ideally to have about 1,000 contacts per campaign in order to test that message market fit. And then simply put, all we do is we double down on what works. Typically, we're tracking 3 main things. We're tracking the reply rate, so what percentage of emails get a reply, and the benchmark across like a large sample size of emails. When you're sending over like 1,000 emails at a time, we're looking for over 1% reply rate, right? Because if 1% of 1,000 reply, that's a decent enough reply percentage. And by the way, I exclude out of offices in this case, right? So that like you can actually exclude out of offices from your stats. And the other 2 metrics that we should really care about is the contacts to positive responses ratio. So essentially, how many people do you need to contact in order to generate 1 positive reply? So in this case, the benchmark is about 1 in 300 contacts. Again, it depends on how big your service available market is, and that's just good so that you can forecast and predict your reply rates. And right now, for some of our clients, we're able to do this. For some clients, we're not really able to predict that, because, you know, testing out different types of messaging takes some time. And if you don't give it like 3 or 4 months, in most cases, like even 5 months, 6 months, you probably would not really establish this like responses per number of contacts. And I know this firsthand, because a lot of the time, like clients tell us within like a month or 2, like, oh, hey, like we don't want to do this email outreach anymore. And I'm just like, we haven't even tested it to 100% just yet. And it's a bit frustrating, but at the same time, I get it, because some people don't have patience for more than like 2 months, especially from like a service provider. But if you are doing it in-house, like at least like in the back of your mind, just know that this will take you 5, 6, 7, 8 months before being able to actually predict how many replies you could be getting for every like 300 contacts or for every 1,000 contacts. And the third thing that a lot of people overlook is just the net number of new emails that are sent per day, because a lot of the time, like especially in my case, a lot of the time we could promise to send 10,000 emails per month per client, but if their service available market is very, very small, it makes it really, really hard to actually send that number of emails. So the net new email sent per day just shows that we're putting in the inputs in order to get the outputs, right? So that's another really important metric. So essentially, reply rates just tell us, hey, is this message working? Contact to lead ratio is like, how efficient is the actual messaging? And the net new emails is like, hey, are we feeding the system enough inputs in order to make that happen? Now, after we go through all of these steps of go-to-market, this is typically when we can determine what tech stack we actually need. So what I mean by that, I'm just going to break this down really quickly. First of all, we need a CRM. And the first question that we need to ask ourselves is, what is our CRM, or what is the heart of the system? If you don't have a CRM, you could just have a random spreadsheet and it will still be like your de facto CRM, right? So that's the first thing. And essentially, in this case, you have one of 3 options. The first option that you have, you could use clay.com as your CRM, right? Like you can just store all the data inside of clay.com. The second option you have is you can store it inside of a database like Supabase, for instance, which you could use as your CRM with all the contacts and companies, because it's free for up to 200,000 contacts or so. So you can basically have a free CRM forever. Then the third option you have is using just a random spreadsheet as your CRM. And then, of course, the other option that you would always have is like a legit CRM. So if you have like a HubSpot or something of that sort. Now that you know that you have this CRM, or you have this heart of the system, we can now build the tech stack around it. Now it's a matter of you choosing the right tools in order to build any lead list. In these cases, I would recommend for you to pick like 2 or 3 of the tools that we talked about. So ideally, you probably want one tool for lookalike tools, one tool for LinkedIn-based data. You may want another one for like Google Maps scraping if you're going after local businesses. AI agents, you don't really need to get like a permanent subscription. You could just like basically just borrow it for a bit. And then you can just use Claude Code as well. So I assume you'll have at least 2 or 3 of these categories covered, but that's basically how you determine what tech stack you should be using. Now, after you're done with that, you need to go and learn all of these tools. For context, I've created a directory with every single sales tool that I know how to use, and it's got over 50 different sales tools over here. So if you scroll through, it's got like all the tools, and let's say I go on something like, let's just take as an example, HeyReach. There is a video here showing you how to use HeyReach, and if you want to get like a discounted price, for example, you get 99% off HeyReach for the first 45 days of using it. In this case, you can just click into it and it will take you straight into that video as well. Then on top of that, so just to recap and take a step back, we've discussed what the heart of the system is. We've chosen the right tools. Whenever we do choose those tools, we need to make sure that they have an MCP connection or an API connection or a webhook available. That means that Claude Code can basically go and connect to that tool and find those leads and enrich them and qualify them for us. Because if it doesn't have any sort of MCP, API connection, or webhooks, then there is no way that we can get Claude Code to go and do that work on our behalf, right? Step number 3 will be choosing the right email personalization method. Again, for that, AI projects, custom GPTs. You can train Claude Code, you can use Twain, you can use Octave, you can use Autobound, and you can see all the different options inside of this YouTube video that I've made in the past. So all you would need to do is just check that out in your own time, and I'll make sure to provide you with that video as well, so you can just see that for yourself. And then moving on, you would then need to connect all of these lead list tools to the heart of your system. So whether that's like Clay, Cursor, Visual Studio Code, like whatever you use as the heart of your system, it needs to connect straight into those lead list tools that we talked about. And then after you learn and buy all of these tools, this is when you can start planning the campaigns and then going through the process of building a lead list, enriching it, qualifying it, personalizing the message, and then launching that campaign. Now, here is the thing. The reason that I'm talking about this for over 30 minutes now is because we need to understand what go-to-market is. We need to be on the same page about the mechanics and the manual steps before we jump into Claude Code and we're staring at like a blank screen and we're just like, what do we do, right? And my thinking is this. You can absolutely source lead lists, enrich them, and qualify them using Claude Code, Cursor, Clay, or any other tool like that. In my opinion, if you're working for an in-house sales team right now, where you're like a VP of sales, a sales rep, or anyone of that sort, Clay is your place to be, because Clay is just so much simpler. It's all inside of one tool, and it's a nice visual, like spreadsheet looking like interface. And you don't need to worry about local permissions versus global permissions. You don't have the threat of your data being leaked and your APIs being exposed and someone all of a sudden getting access to your CRM because you were not careful with your env files and all of the other files. You don't have that risk with Clay, but you have that risk at the time of me recording this with Claude Code, because pretty much everyone right now inside of Claude Code, as I mentioned it, bypasses all the permissions. So you're basically giving access to your entire computer, to every single file, and there is that security risk, which yes, you can minimize, but you still need to be pretty technical. You need to know quite a few things in order to be able to do that. So if you're working inside of a sales team, I just recommend you stick to Clay or you learn Clay. And by the way, no better way to do that than using Unlock Clay, which is my course that teaches you Clay in under 5 hours, more like under 10 hours now, but it's the best course on the market. It literally costs just £100. So go check it out if you're interested. And in my opinion, Clay is simpler to learn. However, my recommendation is start getting used to using Claude Code on a daily basis. Use it for random projects like data sourcing, enrichment, and qualification, because that way you will cut on a lot of your costs inside of Clay.com. So even if you're using Clay for the personalization piece and for centralizing all the data, you can source the lead lists inside of Claude Code. You can enrich it and qualify it inside of Claude Code, and I'll show you later in the course how to go about doing that. And if you're doing all of this just solely for yourself, Claude Code does the job. Right? Like you could learn Claude Code, and if you're just doing it for yourself and you don't need to share anything with your colleagues, you could just do it all on your computer. The real challenge becomes when you're trying to move from local projects to global projects, and that's when it becomes a bit awkward with Claude Code. So if you're just doing everything solo, you could by all means just trust Claude Code to do that. And the minute that you need to share something with your team using Claude Code, that's when it becomes a bit awkward, as I mentioned, with like all the global and local permissions, which we'll cover in a later section of this course when we cover the security part of Claude Code. And before I wrap up this passionate rant about go-to-market, let's just jump for a second back into the service available market conversation that we had earlier. If you have a smaller service available market of less than 15,000 contacts, then typically you will need to switch to a high-touch, human-centric approach. What I mean by that is you would need to use a lot of different platforms at the same time for outreach. So you may use LinkedIn, emails, and mobile calling, and you will need to attend conferences, and you would need to track your website visitors using a tool like RB2B, for example, right? RB2B.com, which can identify anyone that visits your website, and it can ping you inside of Slack in real time. So for example, if I go into this leads from website visits channel, I can see a bunch of companies and people visiting my website in real time. And whenever they visit my website, I can just open this inside of Knock2, which is the tool that I use for this. And it will basically find me the buying committee of those companies as well. And of course, you can automate outreach to them if you know how to use Clay.com or any tool similar to that. Now, just a couple of quick things that I want to touch on as well before we jump into how to actually implement this go-to-market approach inside of Claude Code. There is a lot of bullshit shit out there. There is a lot of noise out there. I think I'm a part of the problem as well, because sometimes I optimize for the number of comments under lead magnet posts. So I just basically make it sound too good to be true with a lot of the giveaways that I do. And, it's just a part of the LinkedIn game a lot of the time. But essentially, I just wanted to be 100% honest with you at this stage now. Typically, there are two things that I see on LinkedIn, and I speak to my friends that are like in the outbound space, in sales roles and so on. And there are two things that everyone overhypes and everyone raves about, where in reality, like, they're absolutely hopeless, and I don't recommend you to try those out. The first thing is AI video prospecting. And I'm sure there are some success stories behind this, but I've seen way too many people come in and tell me how they used a tool like SendSpark to send AI personalized videos. They ended up spending thousands on these kind of tools with very little result to show for it. So I'm very skeptical of AI video prospecting, even though on my LinkedIn right now, I've sent tens of videos manually to prospects. And that works if you have a small service available market. You can send like manual videos that you record with actual one-on-one interactions. But I've tried AI video prospecting using tools like SendSpark, PitchLane, even Loom AI, and it just doesn't work that well. So don't bother trying to figure out how to do that. Also, AI voice notes. I've seen so much about that, but so far, like, I've tried all sorts of tools to make that happen. I've actually just filmed something on how I use like Growth Machine, which is a tool that enables you to do this like multi-channel outreach using like LinkedIn, voice messages, Twitter DMs, emails, all of that, all in one sequence. And that didn't work too well as well. So I would stay away from those two. And believe it or not, after talking to you for the last 35 minutes about go-to-market, first of all, I almost lost my voice. So hopefully you can like this video up to this point, just to make it worthwhile for me to continue recording it. And secondly, we're finally in a position where we're going to be implementing go-to-market inside of Claude Code by building a completely new project, where we're going to do all of the following 10 steps. So we will start off with creating a data intake form, very similar to a client onboarding form, and that will trigger the consequent 10 steps. The first step that it will trigger is connecting data sources. So we'll connect all of those different lead list tools like Prospeo, Google Maps scrapers, or anything of that sort. We will then source the actual lead lists inside of Claude Code. We will enrich them, we will qualify them, we will generate personalized messaging. And after that, we can create a campaign, we can create a campaign dashboard, we can create campaign analytics. And more than that, if we need to onboard a client, I'll show you how we can go about onboarding the client based on a data intake form. And more than that, we can schedule this to run for clients whenever we trigger any sort of client onboarding flow, so that as soon as that form is filled in, that's the point at which we then basically continue with the rest of that process that I've just outlined here. So give me a couple of seconds to go grab some coughing syrup, and I'll be back to build out this entire Claude Code workflow that I've just hyped up to you. Finally, we're at a point at which we can log back into Visual Studio Code or whatever your IDE of choice is. And finally, we're at a point where we can use Claude Code in order to be able to create an entirely automated motion for go-to-market. So what I mean by that, we're going to start off by creating some sort of data intake form. This can be in the form of like an onboarding form that a client fills in if you are a lead generation agency owner, or this can just be a form that answers all of the most basic questions about your sales process, about your persona, the pain points that you solve, and the product or service that you're selling. Based on that, we can then connect Claude Code to different data sources, and based on that data intake form, we will understand what kind of data we need to then scrape or collect inside of lead lists. So we can go about building and sourcing those lead lists using Claude Code. So Claude Code will be doing all the filtering. We'll then be enriching those lead lists, qualifying them, personalizing outreach, creating campaigns and dashboards and campaign analytics. And we can even streamline the client onboarding process using Claude Code. So without further ado, let me scope this out and show it to you visually first, and then we'll crack on with building this out. So the first thing to keep in mind, there will be 6 different inputs needed when it comes to the files that we need to attach into the folder. So what I mean by that, whenever we are starting this new project for Claude Code for automating like the go-to-market process, we'll have a Claude.md file, we'll have a planning phase file, we'll have a secure file, which basically helps you with quality assurance and code review and so on. We'll have that GTM intake form, and we'll also have an MD file with the API keys, which will go into that .nv folder, right? And just to visualize this a tiny bit better, I've created this Claude artifact, which will show it to us a bit better as well. So you can see in this case, it explains everything step by step. So CLAUDE.md is like our core operating instructions for Claude Code using the WAT framework. And shout out to Nate Huck, by the way. He's the first person that I heard about the WAT framework from. And he's like really, really good at teaching all of this stuff as well. And essentially that's the first input. So CLAUDE.md file, it's just like the agent instructions. Then the second thing that we'll have is the secure.md file, which has all the skills and permissions for security. So basically it just creates that quality assurance for you, the security stuff. And it just makes sure that, whatever you create with Claude Code, it's safe to use. And then also we have the planning phase MD file, which just basically creates a step-by-step checklist to complete before writing any new code on a new project. So that just means that your plan is going to be rock solid before we actually build anything out in Claude Code. And then on top of that, we'll have a 13-section client intake form mapping every single input. So things like defining the ICP, TAM and SAM sizing, personas, pain points, objection handling, like do not contact lists, campaign preferences, all of that good stuff. We'll also have a 10-step B2B outbound methodology in the form of that GTM engineering process MD file, which I mentioned will be also available to anyone inside of one of the paid courses that I run. And by the way, you can create all of this for yourself, right? Like so far you'll be getting from me the Claude MD file, you'll be getting the secure MD file from me as well, and you can get the planning phase MD file also as the top link in the description under the video. The GTM data intake form took me absolutely forever to create, so I'm not giving it away for free here. And the GTM engineering process thing I'm not going to give away as well. However, these are the 5 inputs that are needed. And on top of that, you will also create an API keys file, which will contain all of your API keys for all of that. So the first thing that we would need to do is similar to all the previous processes that we talked about. We just need to go and create a new folder. So the way that we go about that is inside of your Claude Code account, or your Visual Studio Code account rather, you're just going to click on Command O on your keyboard, and that should hopefully open a new folder for you. If it doesn't open a new folder for whatever reason, then you basically just need to first of all, of course, create the folder, right? So I'm going to click on new folder over here. I'm going to call this Outbound 2026 CC. For CC stands for Claude Code, obviously. And in this case, if we head back into, for the time being, I think we can just close this, right? And I'm going to click Command O on my screen, and now I can open this folder, right? So Outbound 2026. And in the meantime, I'm going to click Yes, I trust the authors, and I'm going to click on Open, and I'm going to just basically select that folder all over again. So the first thing you would need to do is just make sure that you drag all of these files that are mentioned into the folder. Of course, if you don't have some of these files, you'll have to improvise and create them in the first place. But in my case, all of these files are available literally right in front of me over here. So all I'm going to do is just click on Download. So I'm just going to click into that. It will download it. And I'm just going to drag and drop all of these files directly into the folder. So just give me a second to do that. And you should now be able to see that we've got a CLAUDE.md file, the GTM file, the GTM data intake form, the planning phase, and the secure file. And in this case, I'm not going to be uploading the researcher, code reviewer, and quality assurance files because they're already basically included in the secure.md file. So now if I look at the folder here, we can see that it's got all the relevant documents. So if I go back for a second into Visual Studio Code, I should be able to see them on the left-hand side of the panel. So all I'm going to do now is just click into the Claude chat, and I should be able to see that if I click on new session, a new session starts. So this is basically just the basic setup where we've imported all of the folders and we've completed step 1 of the process, which is just importing all of those files and making sure that they are all in the right place. On top of that, I very much recommend that you spend some time creating an MD file with the API keys, and that should contain all the API keys to all the relevant sales tools that you're connected to. So I've got such file and I'll be uploading it very shortly into the folder as well. But for the time being, since nothing is being executed, you don't really need to add it just yet. And one good practice to get into with Visual Studio Code is whenever you import any new documents, just run the init command. So just use the /init, click on enter, and you should be able to see now that it's basically reading all of these files and it's just seeing and trying to understand what it's all about. So in this case, it will just basically give you that. It will ask you to access the session. Always make sure that you just give it this second permission and switch this to plan mode. So let's just give it a couple of seconds to digest all of that information. On top of that, because we've uploaded these 5 documents, it basically already can create a quick outline for you of what this project is all about. So over here, if you have a read on the right-hand side, it automatically generates a plan for you of how you can actually go about creating this entire project completely from scratch. So over here, it mentions the creation of a B2B go-to-market automation system. The one thing that you need to be very careful about is about how you name the Claude.md file. So I'm going to click into it over here, and I'm going to just right click on it and I'm going to rename it to make sure that it is Claude.md, otherwise it's not recognized properly. And basically, in summary, it just generates a quick high level plan, but obviously it's not going to be in depth right now. So over here where it says accept this plan, the idea behind this is not to accept it straight away, so we'll always keep a note, keep planning. And now if we take a step back and if we look at the 5-step process that we have to go through over here in order to build that GTM motion for us, the second step involves a voice transcription explaining what we want to do. So in this case, what I'm going to do is open up my voice dictation tool. So it's called Whisperflow, as you probably heard me talk about it a million times already. So I'm going to open that. So I'm just going to copy and paste the exact text that I want to make sure that I cover throughout this voice dictation that I'm sending across to Claude Code. But basically, I'm just going to give it a quick passionate rant about what I'm trying to do in this specific project. So I'll start by saying something like this. The inputs that will trigger the rest of this project to run will be the answers to a client onboarding or client intake form alongside the transcripts from the conversation that I had with a prospect. Based on this, I want you to determine which kind of tools they most likely need in order to execute the outbound and inbound go-to-market motion. I want you to reference your knowledge of the 5 different data sourcing tools, be it lookalike tools, LinkedIn heavy tools like Prospeo, and some other options. And based on that, I want you to determine what tech stack we would need to prescribe for this client. I would also then, towards the latter stage of the project, prescribe you with the API keys for the selected tools. And after I give you the API keys for the tools, I want you to go and source the relevant company lists and contact lists. I will also follow up by telling you some additional criteria for qualification and enrichment of those prospects, but I want you to already suggest the different kind of data points that we would need to enrich and qualify the contacts and companies on the basis of, based on your existing knowledge of the intake form. More than that, I would like you to take reference of the top copywriting templates that we have used in order to generate a lot of replies in the past. And I want you to use some of those templates in order to generate personalized messaging to each individual prospect using those templates, and adapting those templates to each individual clients that we're onboarding. On the back of that, I want you to create a campaign inside of a LinkedIn automation tool like HeyReach or inside an email automation tool like SmartLead. And on top of that, I want us to create an analytics dashboard where we can track replies. And I also want any positive replies to be reflected in front of that dashboard as well. And finally, on top of that, later down the line, after we build up the initial project, I want you to create a system whereby I can duplicate and clone this system across numerous clients, so we can recycle this as a go-to-market motion which we can adjust to every individual client. You can see it has now generated a really, really long voice note transcription over here. So I'm basically just going to copy all of that and I'm going to adjust it over here. And I'm going to basically just keep it in plan mode and just send it across to Claude Code. And just for your understanding, initially I was thinking of showing it to you as a means of just like creating the process just for yourself. But the principles are completely the same if you want to do it on behalf of other companies as well, if you're running like a lead generation business, for instance. So after feeding all of that information, you should now basically digest it. And now I'm going to say, ask me any clarifying questions before adjusting the planning for this specific project. And I'm going to send it across now as well. So let's give it a couple of seconds. Whilst this loads in the background inside of Visual Studio Code, I went ahead and added a bunch of other documents that I thought would be really, really useful. For example, I added my cold email copywriting templates library with over 60 proven cold email copywriting frameworks. I basically added some first liners for emails, some copywriting rules, humanizing phrases so that AI does not sound robotic, some triggers that we can look for from contacts, some different campaign ideas plays, for example, like new enroll, website visitors, something of that sort. Side dishes, which again, it's another thing that is quite contextual to my business. Some spintax copies so that every single message does not sound the same. And so that there are a lot of different variations when it comes to the email copy and the copy behind the LinkedIn messages. And then finally, I also added some SOPs when it comes to generating the opening lines for the copy. So all of these resources will be available inside of one of the courses. So whether that's Unlock courses, assuming that I do bring out Unlock courses shortly, which will give you access to all of these courses for a one-off subscription fee, or alternatively, this will be available inside of the Unlock Clay or the Unlock Claude Code course that I'm about to bring out. So that's that. And you can see on top of that, I added all of these cool other things here as well. Right now, it's asking us some clarifying questions. So it says, do you have existing copy templates you want to load into the system? I'll just say other. I just added some. For the analytics dashboard, what format do you prefer? Let's use the recommended. For multi-client cloning, how do you want to spin up a new client? I'll just say, it says CLI script, so we'll go with that. When a client uses both email and LinkedIn, should the system create campaigns on both platforms in one run or handle them separately? I'll say both in one run. And here we are. And once this loads, can I just be 100% real with you? I'm showing you how to do this in the fastest and the most efficient way possible by providing you with all the documents. But of course, the output is only as good as the input. So if you have like hundreds of these different files, and if you convert these PDF files into Markdown files, that will reduce the context, for instance. So there are a lot of ways that we can optimize this further. And the better that the inputs are, the better that the outputs will be as well. So this is just to show you what's possible just by doing this, just by spending 1 hour on creating a Claude project. But of course, if you spend like 50 hours creating this, you'll have a far better system. So it's just a matter of how much time are you willing to spend on creating this. So over here, it says, good, the PDFs needed Poplar to read. No idea who Poplar is or what Poplar is, but sounds good to me. You can see it's germinating right now. So let's give it a couple of seconds, maybe go grab a drink, come back. And just to recap what we've done so far, obviously we've uploaded all of these cool files to the folder. We added a voice transcription explaining what we want to do inside of this project. We asked some clarifying questions. We copied those instructions from the voice transcriptions into Claude Code. And now we're going to go down the happy path. And if you're not familiar with what the happy path concept in automations is, it basically is the idea that the best way to build an automation is just by scoping it and then trying to build it. And whenever it gives you any sort of error, you just try and fix that error, right? It's just absolute common sense, but it's just another word for me saying like, hey, let's just go through a bit of trial and error. And over here, you can see now it's adjusted the actual plan. So in this case, it gives the context, it gives the files that we need to leverage, the full project structure. Whoa, you could see it's got a lot, right? Like what you can see over here is basically, we'll start with the Claude.md file. We've got the intake file. We've got the transcripts. We've got the client information. And then that will basically trigger like the tech stack, the sourcing of the companies and the contacts, the enrichment of both, the generation of the messaging, the syntax will then be applied to the messaging. The campaigns will be created separately in HeyReach and SmartLead, which are my two go-to platforms for multi-channel outbound. Analytics, and then again, onboarding clients, sourcing leads. Like this is absolutely next level. Like honestly, you could probably spend years like trying to figure out how to do this on your own manually otherwise, but this just does simplifies a lot of this for us. To be honest, I think this process looks good to me. And one thing I can't stress, like I'm not going to record like a 12-hour breakout video in the middle of this, just like chatting to it back and forth, because the idea behind this is to show you like 90% of how to build it. And of course, needless to say, in most cases, I will say, no, keep planning, and I'll just keep on hammering it with suggestions. But for the time being, I just want to show you how far you can go by just spending an hour on this. So I'll say yes and auto accept. I'm now going to switch this over to bypass permissions mode because I just want to make sure that we build this out as fast as possible. This is not a good practice, by the way, to put it into bypass permissions mode, but it does just mean that it's not going to be asking me for permission for every random like bash or read command. And you can see it's going to go through this checklist of items, which is quite reassuring. So you can see it's split it into 7 phases for now. So starting off with that first piece, which is creating Claude.md file, then project directory structure, and so on. Now, I expect that in total, this may take about an hour to do in the background or 2 hours to do in the background. So essentially, if you just leave it on bypass permissions mode, it will just be building in the background. Just make sure, again, to not just close your computer fully, just keep it open. Even if your computer goes dark, absolutely fine. It's still going to be doing its thing in the background. And on the left-hand side, of course, you can see all of the files are being updated and so on. But in the meantime, it's just going to be imagining, it's going to be doing its thing. Okay guys, you know how I said that this may take about an hour or two to be built out? It's actually been about 20 minutes. I'm not sure if you can see it on my black and white phone, but anyways, it was all built out in about 20 minutes. In the meantime, I unloaded the dishwasher, put my rice cooker on. I've got the air fryer cooking the chicken for dinner. So I'm basically ahead of the game right now. And this is one of those positive side effects of Claude Code as well. It's the fact that the machine can be running in the background and you could just be doing random domestic stuff, becoming a domestic god like I am at the same time. But anyways, all jokes aside, in this case, you can see that it says all of this has been built already, like the intake form, the template extraction, lead sourcing enrichments, copywriting, campaigns analytics, and the ability to clone projects. All 6 workflow SOPs are in /workflows. So if we head into this folder over here, we should be able to see workflows. And if we click into that, you should be able to see that all of these have been created for sourcing leads and so on. What to do next? Add API keys to .env. So all we basically need to do, as I mentioned before, .env file basically contains all of your logins. So if you just go into search and type in env, you should be able to see it inside of this specific folder. So in this case, all we need to do is go and fetch those API keys for all the platforms. And then as soon as I come back, I'll show you what we do next as well. And you should now be able to see that I've also added my API keys into that .env folder. So I basically just dragged it across over here somewhere, and I basically added the API keys for some of the platforms that we may want to be using. So you can see done, keys are now in .env, and I added the API keys specifically for Prospio, SmartLead, and HeyReach. It still is asking for my Anthropic API key, which I'll be dropping right now as well. So now I can say I just added them. Can you see them? And yes, you can now see that all the API keys were added. Now it's just saying to basically copy into clipboard these random commands for terminal, I guess. So in this case, I'm going to head back into the terminal and I'm going to just basically run it inside of terminal. So at the bottom here, I'm just going to paste those commands and click on run. You can see now it's auto-updating Homebrew. I have no idea what the hell that means or what's going on, but it must be legitimate, right? So it must be working. You can see now it's basically just downloading a bunch of stuff, and I guess that's what's happening here. But for context, you don't really need to be overly technical. I mean, you probably do in order to make sure that this is all 100% safe, but assuming that you are just an enthusiast like myself, this is what we'll be doing right now. Okay, so we now should be able to see that it basically asked me to copy and paste a couple of commands into the terminal. I've basically gone ahead and done that. That took probably 5 minutes of my time of just back and forth. Again, it's just common sense stuff. Like whenever it sends you anything like this, just copy it and paste it into the terminal and then click on enter and it should be fine. And now it's saying the template library is initialized in all systems that builds. The pipeline is ready for the first client run. To onboard your client, you need to run this specific command, and then you'll be prompted to put in the client name, the path to their intake form. So for that, we would need to have an intake form in the form of a markdown file, and then finally the path to their called transcripts folder. So essentially, to put it super simply, the first thing that this would require is for you to have some random client information to test out all of this with. So basically, all I'm going to do is go ahead, find a random anonymized form that someone has submitted before for a done-for-you Clay implementation. And in this case, you can see it's a company called dbssquad.co. And basically, it contains all of the different parameters covering their products, the pain points that they solve, their existing sales process, and so on. And in this case, we're just going to basically download this as a markdown file. And actually, inside of Excel, it doesn't give us the option to download it as a markdown file. So I'm basically just going to download it as a PDF. And then now I'm going to use some dodgy PDF to markdown converter, which will be the top link over here. And I'm going to just basically drag the PDF file and paste it into a Google document, which literally would just take me like half of my time today to do. And then after that, now that I have a markdown file, I'm basically just going to drop it into that folder for outbound, which I've just created. So let's give it a couple of seconds. And now that I have dropped it into that folder, basically all I'm going to do now is I'm going to head back into the project and I'm going to say, I just added a new file to the folder. And over here, I can just select this file on the left side of the panel. And I can just say, I just added a new file to the folder. Actually, in this case, I can just rename it to mock data. So I'm just going to click into it, click on rename mockdata.md. And in this case as well, I've just gone ahead and found some transcripts of the past conversation with this prospect. So I added it as mock data transcripts. So I'm going to say, I just added a new file to the folder based on these two files called mock data transcripts and mockdata.md, trigger the rest of the process so I can see how it plans out for this specific client as a test example. And basically now that I'm pasting this over here, we should now see the entire process happen. So including the company list building and so on, hopefully. Let's just see how that plans out. So here we are. It's reading the transcripts, is basically just digesting all of that info for us. Okay, guys, another thing to consider with all of this is typically it will just tell you like, hey, we've got all the API keys now. Of course, if you don't have the API keys, just go and create a markdown file and call it .env and just upload it into that folder. Then after that, it just runs all the commands for you. If you keep it on bypass permissions, I very much recommend that you do it on edit automatically mode for the first couple of projects that you build out. And then on the back of that, you can see right now, it says that everything is absolutely ready. And it basically says, first of all, it's done the service available market, or like the total addressable market mapping. It's created 2 ICP segments for us. It's basically established that this person specifically wants email-only outreach. Personalization depth has to be pretty deep. And in this case, it just basically came up with a primary tool that's supposed to be used for this. In this case, it recommends Prospio, but it also says, hey, we can do lookalikes of their dream clients, or we can use AI Arc as an alternative to Prospio, which is spot on. Based on that, we basically, in some of the inputted files over here, one of the hundreds of different assumptions that we made was that typically we want to source around 20 to 25 contacts or companies just to have a rough idea of like the quality of the sample data. And then based on that, if the first 25 records look good, we can basically go and find more contacts and more companies. So in this case, you basically came up with some dream clients that fits the ideal client profile. And more than that, he also confirmed that these clients have the following signals. So they're either hiring for SDRs, they're either the people that we're reaching out to are new enroll, either they're part of a faith network, which is very contextual because this company is very deep into like something to do with faith and like offshore hiring, and it's like in the intersection of that, which is super specific and niche. And then more than that, obviously, like funding is a good signal for them as well. So based on that, in theory, this should have generated some email copy for us with syntax variation. And each email opens with a contact's strongest signal mention, like hiring, funding, faith network, or new enroll stuff. And we've also plugged in the Smart Lead API and the Prospio API to this. And you can see right now that it's basically going through a lot of this stuff and it's still thinking. But if we go back and take a look at the GTM process behind this, it basically has gone through steps 1 to 5, 6, 7. And like it's at a point now where like we're creating the campaigns, and that's what we're basically waiting for. And as soon as it creates the campaigns, of course, I'll show them to you so we can basically just go through them together. And you can see right now it's searching for more people for this specific ICP. So let's give it a couple of seconds and then I'll come back to you and I'll give you a quick update on this. All right, guys, just so that we're on the same page, basically the way that it works is typically it will just give you the lead list for the first 25 people. Over here, you could just say, can you show me the lead list here in a dashboard-like view? It will then show you the lead list in a dashboard-like view. You should be able to see that the email addresses are pending because we still haven't verified or found the emails, but we match the ICP fit against the criteria in the client onboarding form. And based on that, you can see some are strong fits, some are wrong titles. So for example, like product owners we don't want to be selling to. And then of course, it will flag anything where like there is a lack of emails, there are the wrong kind of ICP matches when we filter in the database. And in this case, out of 25 contacts, only 5 contacts fit the ICP. And then more than that, I basically said, okay, cool, find me the LinkedIn profile URLs of all these people. So in this case, it basically found me the LinkedIn profile URL of this Dan Bladen dude. So let's check him out. 13,500 followers on LinkedIn, pretty popular dude. And then on top of that, you should be able to see all of the details here. So then that's basically how you can do some quality assurance stuff manually on your side. And then you can just prompt it to go and enrich the people's profiles, for example. And in this case, I'll say like, go ahead, because it's now asking me to, if we want to find their work emails, I'm saying go ahead. But in the meantime, inside of my terminal now, you can see right now it's written the actual email copy and it's created a campaign inside of Smart Lead as well. So we can check that out in a second. In the meantime, I'm just going to say, in the meantime, here is how my terminal looks, right? And I don't want to overwhelm it with too many tasks, but if you think about talking to a person, right, you should be able to maintain like 2 different topics within the same conversation. So let's see how it responds to that. But in this case, it's just saying that, you know, enriching the person inside of Prospio is not working too well, but oh well, that should be absolutely fine. In the meantime, we're basically enriching the person's LinkedIn profile, and at the same time, we're also taking a look at what's happening in the terminal because we are looking to create that campaign, syntax the email copy, and just make sure the email copy is good in the first place. So let's give it a couple of seconds. And in the meantime, I'm just going to say stop enriching the LinkedIn profile, focus on the terminal, and launching the smart lead. Right, something like that. And let's have a look. And for context, in the instructions, the very start over here, we basically assume that we want to draft the campaign and leave it in a draft mode for us to review before we launch it. So that's that. And you can see right now it suggests, 5 contacts. It's basically trying to create a smart lead campaign as we speak as well. Or as I speak right now, it's trying to create a campaign at the same time. Oops, one mistake that I have made so far as I was just checking on my air fryer, which is literally located like a couple of meters behind me. One thing that I just realized is that the campaign is now live inside of Smart Lead, which was not my intention. I thought it was supposed to be in draft mode. And this is just reflective of the fact that this bypass permissions can get out of hand sometimes. But in the meantime, it mentions that, 10 companies, 13 contacts, 13 personalized emails were added into Smart Lead. So of course, this is the point at which we then need to go into plan mode. And this is typically when you can say, okay, but next time, make sure to tweak this SOPs so that you just basically move this campaign to be in draft mode, and also outputs the personalized email examples in the dashboard-like view. So I can basically just look at it next time in a dashboard-like view, and then that way I can actually review the email copy, give you some feedback, and based on that, probably rewrite the email, right? But in this case, the campaign is live, so let's go into Smart Lead and see and check it out for ourselves. Well, as we can see over here, we have 2 campaigns. We have the Dream Bigger Squad test and the Dream Bigger Squad email outbound. Both campaigns are in draft mode. This was very lucky this time. Somehow they're in draft mode and they're not actually live. But for whatever reason, Claude Code just told me that it was live. So I was quite scared naturally. So in this case, I'm going to click into this. I can see the 3-step sequence. And in each sequence, you can see the start of it is syntaxed. And over here, we basically, if I click into preview mode, I should be able to see the actual emails. So if I click into preview, let's have a look at what it came up with. So this is what it looks like. Hey, Dan, I work with a few software tech companies on this, and one pattern keeps showing up. Founders with a working playbook who are still doing most of their selling themselves. We recently helped a values-aligned B2B growth stage company build their sales team in under 90 days by placing an offshore Filipino sales team trained on the exact playbook, creating sustainable livelihood while hitting pipeline targets they couldn't staff for with US hires. And then it basically calls them out on hiring SDRs, open to exploring how faith-driven founders are addressing this challenge. And in this case, the 2 follow-ups are pre-salesy. I'm sure we can agree here that the actual email formatting is completely off. That's the first thing. And then the second thing, it's actually just super, super salesy, right? So let's take a look at the second sequence as well. So if we go into the second sequence over here, we should be able to see that there is also a second sequence created, but there is no existing email copy. So I'm just going to delete that second sequence. And by looking at that awful email copy, the only thing that it makes me think about is the fact that it's not actually using email templates from the templates library. So I'm going to say, can you please make sure that you rewrite each email and output it here for me to review, and use all the copywriting documents to help you write those emails, right? And for context, there are about 10 different copywriting templates over here. So things like copywriting templates, cold email first liners, humanizing phrases that help email sound more humane, different triggers, different campaign plays, and so on. So this will take some time. You can see it's now asking me to install this random CSV thing so that I guess we can import CSVs and we can digest them and stuff. So I've installed it, and it literally just was a quick pop-up move for me here. So now you can see it's now rereading all of this stuff, and it should be good to go. Worth noting that the way that it basically works is that beyond this, it's the same as the process that you will typically have when it comes to manually sourcing the companies, sourcing the contacts, enriching them, qualifying them, and so on. It's just you basically conversing with this AI agent in the form of Claude Code, and then just saying like, hey, this is awful so far. Like the email copy is not sharp. Here is how you can tweak it. Here is the existing copy that I want to run past you, that kind of thing. So beyond this, like, yes, I can give you all of these resources, assuming that you're part of the community, but still beyond this, it's largely how good you can train this AI agent to do its job. Literally within 3 minutes or so, you can see that Claude Code has apologized, and it has basically rewritten the bigger squad emails. And you can see it's basically keeps the same sample of 5 contacts as the main targets. It talks about the templates that it's going to be using. Now it's actually referencing the right templates. For example, we have like a poke the bear and offer templates that we use for people that, raise some funding. And this is, of course, contextual to this specific person. And in this case, it now reads, hey, Dan, I might be off here, but hiring your first BDR after a Series A usually goes one of 2 ways. Either the rep ramps fast, runs your playbook, and you're booking 10 plus meetings a month within a couple of months, or they're still finding their feet at month 4 and you basically fire them. Right, so you can tell straight away over here that it basically researched and made sure that this company has raised Series A. So let me just Google to confirm that. So I'll just go Cadence raises Series A. Let's have a look. And that is true. That is mental. Absolutely mental. They did raise 20 million at Series A. Whoa! Wow, I am very good at this. Gosh, look at me now. Like literally it took like 5 minutes for me to go from like an awful email template over to this one. And then this one is a bit better. It talks about Series A hiring the first AE and healthcare impact space focus. So in this case, we're reaching out to Jessica. We say, hey, I'm just a randomer from LinkedIn, but I noticed Innercase hiring its first AE, and I had 3 ideas I thought might be useful, regardless of whether we ever work together or not. And then it basically just gives 3 ideas to consider the offshore supplement before the full-time hire. And I mean, I quite like that. You see what we're trying to do here. We're trying to create like this silver bullet email where we give them like 3 tips for hiring, which I mean is a good idea, right? Like, come on, Claude is trying here. We need to give it some credit where it's due. And then in this case, it now generates the before and after template for this lead, where it says before and after the situation we stepped in. So it says before a growth stage founder with a working playbook, a Series C behind them, and 5 AE roles open. Oh, wow, this is really smart. And by the way, please, dear editor, don't edit this to make me look smarter, because I really want to show my real reaction. But in this case, you see what we're doing. We're saying like, hey, Alex, before this is what would have happened. A growth stage founder with a working playbook who raised Series C and who has 5 open account executive roles listed on their website is spending a lot of time on like hiring, onboarding, and ramping up US-based sales reps, right? And this is like the before transition, right? So this is like the transition from the before to the after state. In this case, the before is basically where this recipient, Alex, finds themselves. And now the after is, hey, a trained offshore Filipino sales team is now running your documented playbook within 90 days. Pipeline is filled. AEs are focused on closing, not prospecting, blah, blah, blah. This is really good because, again, it's contextual to Alex. I guess they raised Series C. Let's check that to make sure that it's absolutely spot on. So stored, let me find it, stored Series C. And you can see they've raised Series C. That is true. I mean, I'd question how recently they raised Series C, because this was a while ago. But again, we could then train Claude Code on only referencing information from 2026, right? But you can see the difference, right? This is a huge difference. And you may be asking, ooh, how are these copywriting templates so good right now? And the answer is simple, because I've basically manually written them out inside of a Google document. And literally, let me just show you. So you have templates on like upfront value, crazy offers, social proof, like all of these different templates. And for each individual template, I promise you, I've written this out manually myself. Every single table that you see like this, I've spent like literally, I think it was Christmas Day 2 years ago when I was writing these out, which is quite sad, but you do have a framework. You do have an example of each template. You have like how to templatize it, the logic behind it, and in a lot of cases, I've even attached screenshots to show how we do it for real emails. And that's the kind of resource that you get in return for joining one of the courses, which will be linked, top link in the description down below. I don't know, it may sound like me shamelessly plugging stuff, but come on, give me a break. I've literally spent like 3 days in a row recording this whilst cooking dinner at the same time and, trying to stay sane at the same time. So that's that. And of course, on top of that, I got a skin fade, which is like a really sharp, short haircut, for those of you that may not be aware just yet. And finally, in order to wrap this up, I'm just going to click on yes and auto accept, and this will automatically accept all of these changes to the templates. And of course, that will adjust everything inside of Smart Lead as well. So let's just go ahead and do that. Anyways, up to this point, let's be real. You know how you can use Claude Code for go-to-market. You should know by now. You basically just upload a bunch of files. You make sure that you prompt it correctly, in order for it to just plan the whole project for you correctly. And then based on that, assuming you have the right files, you put in the right level of effort and you make sure that it asks you clarifying questions. All you need to do is just go through that manual, chat with Claude Code in order to get to your desired results. And I talked about the happy path already, and pardon the pathetic drawings of the numbers here as well. So this brings me nicely to the next part of the course, where we're now going to be talking about my top 30 plus tips. Yes, you heard that right, 30 plus tips for how you can use Claude Code effectively so that you're not spending too much money on it, so that you're not going through too much trial and error. And honestly, these are the top 30 tips that I wish I knew, rather than me having to spend like 100, maybe 200 hours inside of Claude Code. Rather, I wish someone just told me these tips in advance. So I know a lot of the time you watch these kind of videos and all the tips are very dry and crap. But in this case, I handpicked those tips based on the stuff that I personally find really, really useful. So I hope you enjoy those. So starting off with tip number 1, we're going to be talking about context. I'm sure you're familiar with tokens inside of all of these fancy AI platforms like ChatGPT and Claude. And just so that we're on the same page, context is all the memory, all the information that Claude remembers about you based on all of the conversations that you have with it. And you can see the context bar over here at the bottom. So whenever it fills to its full 100% potential, you're screwed. Because basically at that point, it just stops and it can't do anything. So first of all, whenever you go through a phase of implementation or a phase of planning, and when you wrap up that phase of planning or implementation with Claude Code, just use the /clear command. And then when you click on clear conversation, it will start a conversation completely from scratch. And it will still remember the progress that it has made so far, but it just wipes out a lot of these redundant conversations about, copy and pasting of the prompts and so on. So that's the first tip. And this segues nicely into the second tip, and the second tip being the fact that whenever you import any of these files over here, one file takes a lot more tokens to digest if it's like a PDF or a CSV file. That's why typically you should aim to convert everything into MD files, so .md standing for markdown files, and that way if you open and upload these markdown files, they will be a lot more cost effective. They will cost you a lot less tokens, and hopefully you can reinvest those cost savings into one of my lovely courses. Now, all jokes aside, a lot of the time you may be thinking, okay, but what am I actually spending this memory, this context, the tokens on? And the easiest way for you to tell is to use the /context command. And when you basically type in /context, you should be able to see that this is what you're spending all of your current basic storage on. So essentially you can see over here that most of it is spent on the MCP for like Fireflies, Gamma, HeyReach, Notion, Smart Lead. And this is contextual to this specific project, which is quite reassuring, right? And then that way you can just go and disconnect some MCPs, for instance, if you wish to. And for context, I'm going to be covering MCPs later down the line as well. But MCPs are the most inefficient way for you to actually get the tools to talk to each other. And a lot of the time, if instead you just provide the API keys, it's going to be a lot better for you to connect tools using APIs and getting Claude Code to use the API keys rather than using the pre-built MCPs, because they're just not an efficient way to basically spend all those lovely tokens. Now, moving on to tip number 4, forget about long prompts. Whenever you give Claude Code a long prompt, it remembers majorly the start and the end of the prompt. The middle of the prompt just gets forgotten a lot of the time. And I heard that from a bunch of different gurus and Claude Code, so it must be true, right? Now, moving on to tip number 5, you should always run the init command whenever you just start a new project. So whenever you just click on the /commands and you select init, it will basically just digest all of the files that you inputted, like the Claude.md file, the planning phase file, and so on. Okay, moving on to tip number 6. Let's imagine for a second that we just asked Claude Code, what's my name? And it gave me an answer over here. Let's say that on the back of it writing out my name, it performed a bunch of actions which I want to reverse. So for example, it just went ahead and created a post saying, my name is Tim, right? In that case, if I want to reverse the changes, all I need to do is just click on this arrow at the very top and then rewind, and then click on rewind code to here. And that will just basically reset all of the changes and remove any of the changes since my last prompt. So I hope you find that quite useful. Now moving on to tip number 7. Whenever you create any sort of Claude.md file, it has to be under 250 lines inside of your markdown file. Now, don't ask me why. Just make sure that you don't exceed that 250 lines, because most of the time it will just give you diminishing returns, aka if you're not an economist and you're not familiar with the concept of diminishing returns, you're not going to benefit from increasing your markdown Claude.md file beyond 250 lines. So keep it under 250 lines and you'll be in a great place. Tip number 8, make sure that the most important rules, actions, and so on are all at the very top of the prompt that you write into Claude, because as I mentioned already, it remembers the start and it remembers the end of most of the inputs. So that way, just make sure the most important stuff is at the top and it will be less likely to be forgotten by Claude. Moving on to tip number 9. A lot of the time, Claude will do something wrong, right? And in this case, let's imagine that it uses double dashes. I could basically just say remove the double dashes and create a rule that prevents you from outputting double dashes in this project and globally basically means on any of your projects inside of your Claude Code account. And you can see within a couple of seconds, it will just basically say, okay, cool, I can do that for you, right? And it's now going to ask me for permission because this is on edit automatically. But this is a really, really cool thing to have because that way you can create rules and those rules will make sure that we constrain the outputs in the future and so that we don't come across that going forward. So in this case, I just gave it permission to do that inside of this specific project. And you can see now it's adjusting my Claude.md file with that as well. The other thing to keep in mind, a lot of the time, Claude will add unnecessary stuff to your existing folders. So it's just a lot of random fluff essentially. And in this case, whenever your context window is increasing, what you can basically do is just use the / command and use compress, and that way you will compress all of the existing files over here. So essentially it just compresses all of the files and make sure that your storage is optimized so that you're not spending too many tokens or too much of the storage over here with redundant and stale and random data. Moving on to some of my favorite tips for using Claude Code when it comes to planning. And the first thing that I can't stress enough, make sure that you spend probably 10 to 20 minutes at least planning what you're going to build inside of the project in Claude Code before actually jumping inside of the project. Now, segueing from that into tip number 12, every single time you should be in plan mode whenever you're just starting any sort of project. So just make sure that you switch the toggle from whatever you're using over to plan mode, and that will hopefully save you a lot of scars. Now, if you ever look into the Claude Code feed and you can just see that something is going completely wrong, like for example, you see double hyphens and you see really awkward personalization. And for instance, like in this case, when I was showing you early in the course, the emails were referencing facts from 2021, right? In that case, don't try to correct it inside of the code over here because a lot of the time you are actually able to click into the code and like write random stuff here. But instead of you doing that, just basically prompt it to make the changes. And I know that's common sense, but apparently that still needs to be clarified to some people. So just basically prompt it with some additional rules, constraints, and just a sense of direction rather than you trying to edit something that you can see on the screen over here. Tip number 14 is super ironic because I'm literally on the verge of losing my voice, having spent the last like 2 or 3 days recording this course, which I hope you're finding valuable. And if you are, please make sure to double check that you're subscribed to the channel and make sure to like this video. And apparently there is this thing called hyping a video. So if you want to discover how that works, just look for hype button underneath the video. Click on hype like 10 times. I don't know if that's even possible. I'm not an actual YouTuber, right? Like I've less than 2,000 subscribers at the time of me recording this. But anyways, tip number 14 is all about voicing your briefs. Whenever you have a lot to say to Claude Code, just make sure that you use an AI voice dictation tool. My personal tool of choice is Whisperflow. I'll make sure to add that to the list of things that you need in order to set up Claude Code correctly. So if you want to use my link to try it out, by all means, go do it. It works equally as well on your phone as well. So on my phone, I always go on a walk around the park in the morning, at lunch, in the evening as well. And I would always just speak to it and it would just basically write out my messages, reply to emails and do that kind of thing as well. So you can access other apps as well. Moving on to some of my best tips for the different AI models that you should be using. Simply put, tip number 15 is that you would use Opus for any sort of complex builds. You'll be using Sonnet for any sort of sub-agents, and we will touch on sub-agents probably in a separate video because I don't have the time today to talk about sub-agents. And of course, models will change over time. So this brings me nicely to tip number 17, and that's the fact that the AI models, at the time of me recording this right now, cannot pick up on what appears as common sense to you. So when you say something like, be smart or don't make mistakes, it's too vague. So in that case, instead of saying be smart, you could say something like, you are a B2B outbound veteran and please remember to syntax every single email, because that way by pointing out the behavior which is syntaxing the email, you're able to basically train it up on that component that's required in order for them to be smart, right? Another common sense item, but just thought to add it to the list as well. Moving on to tip number 18. After you complete any sort of project inside of Claude Code, always remember to just copy and paste this prompt and say, create skills based on this conversation. And basically all you would do is just copy and paste this over here, and it will basically then go and do its thing and create a bunch of skills, which you can then later reference in later builds for separate other projects. Now, tip number 19, I've seen a lot of hype across different WhatsApp groups, Discord channels, and whatnot about sub-agents, and sub-agents are overhyped in my opinion. I honestly believe until you become a dangerous intermediate user of Claude Code, you can just skip all the random tutorials on sub-agents. And the main idea behind a sub-agent is the fact that you can have 3 different sub-agents running tasks for you at the same time. So instead of us having to wait for someone to source the data, then enrich it, then qualify it, you can have 3 separate sub-agents doing it all at the same time. However, in my opinion, it's not really worth it in most cases. It's the same as you saying like, oh, hey, let's just hire 3 people instead of 1 because they're more efficient. So in my opinion, it's just absolutely pointless. If you're just getting started with Claude Code. Tip number 20, I've talked about this enough. Just use that secure.md file to do some quality assurance, some code review, and just double check that you can't be hacked super easily whenever you ship any of these products. And if you have any sort of techie, nerdy, geeky, technical friend who understands code, maybe it's worth you taking them out for coffee in return for them to review some of the code, assuming that you're actually shipping some real apps or websites or something of that sort that may leave you exposed or vulnerable. Just as I run out of breath, it's time to talk about tip number 21, and just make sure that your API keys only live in the .env file. So what that basically means is you just create a random Google Doc, right? And then you just rename it to .env, and then you can just basically paste all of your API keys here and then just download it as a .md file. And in that case, you just basically go and upload it into the folder on your computer. And then that way, the .env is only contextual to the project. And basically that way, it minimizes the chance of some random person stealing your personal data later down the line when it's in storage or in the cloud somewhere, right? So that's tip number 21. Just remember to keep your API keys secret and store it in a .env folder only inside of your project. Tip number 22, I've mentioned it a million times. You're probably going to hate me for this, but just please consider not using bypass permissions mode all the time, because that's a bit dangerous. And instead, one thing that you could do is go into settings. And if you go into settings inside of Claude Code, you can type in auto approve. Over here, you should be able to see the auto approve section. And inside of this section, you can basically add items and choose items that you want to automatically approve actions of. So for example, you can auto approve the creation of a database or editing a Google document or whatever, right? Or like editing something. But instead you could basically reject and not auto approve actions like deleting certain folders, for example, right? And that's something that I can cover later down the line. But just please remember to not just always bypass permissions, because that's quite dangerous in my opinion. Another cool habit that I got into, and shout out to Moise, who is my go-to guy for a lot of the Claude Code stuff that I'm learning right now. I'll actually link his LinkedIn profile in the guide, which will be linked as the top link in the description down below, in case if you're interested in one-on-one coaching when it comes to Claude Code. And essentially in this case, what he taught me is as follows. Every single time you can just create a developer folder, right? And you can just create a developer folder over here and call it developer. And in that case, within that folder, you can have a .env file, which has all the passwords, API keys, and so on. And you can just duplicate that folder across every single project that you are on. And that way, that saves you time of recreating that .env file straight away. Now, tip number 24, and I'm the perfect epitome of this tip. Now, tip number 24 is to parallelize your time. And yes, it took me 2 attempts to pronounce parallelize. And the main idea behind this is that you want to do work in parallel, because obviously Claude Code will work in the background. So a lot of the time when you're building a project, just go and do something else, right? Go somewhere else, do something else, or just go and flick a couple of tabs on your computer so you're doing so that you're staying productive whilst Claude Code is running in the background. Now, tip number 25, I'll be showing it to you later on, but essentially you can use Claude Cowork, and for that, all you would need to do is go and type in Claude Cowork into Google, and you should be able to download the Claude Cowork desktop app on your MacBook or on your Windows, Microsoft, I don't know what you call other types of computers. But anyways, you can just basically download Claude Cowork, and then I'll show you in a separate tutorial how you can go about scheduling different tasks on a daily basis using Claude Code. So for example, if every day you want to go and scrape the number of subscribers that I have on a YouTube channel, you could do that using Claude Cowork, because every day you can get it to visit my YouTube channel, grab the number of subscribers and send it to me in a Slack message. And again, I'll be covering that later on, but it's just important for you to know that for that, you would need Claude Cowork, which I believe still is on the same subscription as your Claude plan. So all you need to do is just to download the Claude Cowork app. Tip number 26, I'll be covering that in more detail later down the line, but it's important for you to know this as well. You can actually talk to Claude from your phone, and that way you will synchronize with your terminal and with your computer. So that way you can just basically check in on how your tasks are progressing and so on. All I want you to know up to this point is that it is possible, and I'll show you later on how you can set that up so that you can connect basically your terminal, your Visual Studio Code, and also your phone so that you can stay on top of those updates as well. Tip number 27, and I have experienced this firsthand, is the fact that you need to give Claude Code your brand voice and quality. And what I mean by that, if you have been writing LinkedIn posts over the last 2 years, like I have, just go use a random Apify scraper to scrape all of those LinkedIn posts, and then you can feed it to Claude Code just to give it a benchmark of what your tone of voice is like, because a lot of the time when you explain the brand voice or your values or your qualities or whatever, Claude Code can hallucinate a bit. So that's worth keeping in mind as well. Now moving on to tip number 28. And this one is quite straightforward. I recommend for you to just get a Twitter account or get a Grok account, just for the sake of you going on Twitter and opening up Grok, which will pop up in the corner of your screen typically. And this is how you can stay on top of Claude Code. Now moving on to tip number 28. This is my go-to way to stay on top of all the Claude Code related news, because as you will soon find out, every single day there is a new Claude Code update, which makes your life a bit easier. And by the way, whilst I have your attention, I know I'll probably sound really desperate here, but come on, if you look at my profile on Twitter, at the time of me recording this, I only have one follower on Twitter. I don't even have a profile picture or a background. But I promised myself that I'm going to start posting from the 13th of April onwards, and that's when I come back from my annual leave. So if you want to stay on top of a lot of Claude Code, a lot of Clay stuff, a lot of go-to-market stuff, and if you just want to see a bit of me on your feed, then by all means, just go spare follow over here, because right now my only follower, I believe, is my mum, which is a bit sad, right? But anyways, we'll appreciate you helping me out there as well. Okay, next up, tip number 29. The whole point of Claude Code is not to do any coding, it's to just prompt it. So I can't stress this enough, and I heard this from a technical friend of mine, and he said to me that a lot of software engineers are spending too much time on code. A lot of the technical people are spending a lot of time looking at the code, and they're not actually like building, they're not actually prompting, they're just like spending time manually reviewing code and stuff. And again, don't take advice from me here, but if you are spending a lot of time reviewing the code, just remember the main leverage that Claude Code gives you is the ability to prompt and then build codes that way. So just prompt it instead of adjusting code every single time. Now moving on to tip number 30, never exceeds the 50% context window. And what I mean by that is typically when you see this circle pop up over here, just make sure that you don't exceed the 50% context, because typically that's when it starts bugging, hallucinating, and taking a lot longer to think and load and perform actions on your behalf. So whenever it reaches 50%, just go back to /clear, and then there we are. You should just wipe everything out, right? Now, tip number 31, and I'm so grateful for you sticking with me over the last 30 tips. I awkwardly had to add a 31st tip as well to this, because it's just too good to reject. And this tip is to enable terminal bell notifications. And what I mean by that, every single time when Claude Code stops running in the background, it will notify you. So all we need to do for that is just copy and paste this random command that I just Googled. And in this case, it will just basically start notifying you every single time whenever a specific task has run. And that way you can feel like you're a part of like this random Pavlov's dog experiment. And I'm not sure if you're familiar with that. If you're not, go give it a Google. It's actually quite a decent analogy that I just made up on this Friday evening. But essentially, this is what I mean. Whenever a task gets completed, you will be doing something, and then you will hear the bell, and then you will be able to jump into Claude Code to approve any edits or just to get on with building out the rest of your project. Now, I hope these 31 tips have been useful so far, guys. Do let me know down in the comments. Remember that you can actually comment something thoughtful. You can comment some questions. I literally answer every single question pretty much within like 24 hours or so, simply because I check them on my phone, I check them on my iPad, I check them on my computer, because I'm literally scrolling through YouTube all the time to stay on top of a lot of this Claude stuff, a lot of the Clay stuff, and so on. Okay, guys, here comes the end of this Claude Code course. To be totally honest, initially I was thinking I'll record maybe an 8 or 9 hour course for YouTube to give away completely for free. But here I am. I've spent the last 10 days putting this course together. I spent another 2 to 3 weeks like drafting the different types of content in order to make this free course possible. And I think I'm at the point where I'm almost on the verge of burnout. I'm about to go on annual leave, and I just think I'll leave it at this for now, because I really don't want to worsen the quality of the course from this point onwards. And one thing that you can expect from me in the future is if you do go and grab the guide, which will be the top link in the description down below, I'll make sure to update that guide, and I'll make sure to email you with any updates on Claude Code. So things like Claude channels and Claude dispatch functionality that just came out, which enables you to use Claude Code directly from your phone. Little things like Claude Cloud tasks, which enable you to schedule tasks. So on a daily basis, Claude Code can go and check websites for you, or do some sort of research for you, or summarize your emails, or whatever it is. Also, other updates like how to use Claude connectors, MCP, and that kind of stuff. All of that will be covered in future content by me. I really wanted to put it inside of this course. I feel low-key quite guilty for not integrating it into the course already, but to be totally honest, like, I'm already spending close to $1,000 on the editing for this course because it's quite a long edit. When it comes to the actual editing of this video, believe it or not, with little animations flying in with the different pop-ups and that kind of thing. So if you enjoyed this video, please just triple check that you're subscribed to the channel. Make sure to like this video, comment something nice down below as well. It will really help the algorithm. I heard this hype button being a thing as well on YouTube these days. If you see any sort of hype button, maybe worth pressing it, see what happens. Maybe this course ends up getting over 1,000 views, which will honestly make my day. And then on top of that, going forward, you can expect a lot of AI heavy long form courses similar to this one, completely for free on YouTube. And if you ever want to level up your Claude Code skills, because I'd say by the end of you completing this free course on YouTube, you're already pretty much like an intermediate user of Claude Code. But if you want to push into that advanced territory, if you want to get all the different Claude.md files, all the templates, all the scripts, all of the stuff as it evolves and as Claude Code evolves over time, feel free to check out unlockclaudecode.com, which will be the course that I'll launch very soon. Probably at the time of you watching this video, it will be the second link in the description down below. And this course will give you all the resources that we talked about throughout this video, which I cannot give completely for free. So you'll still find some resources as the top link in the description, but the kind of resources which I've spent the last 3 years putting together will be only available for the paid Unlock Claude Code course students. Now, if you enjoyed this course, I very much look forward to publishing very similar courses going forward. In the meantime, I'm going on annual leave. I hope you really loved this course, and I'll see you in future videos. Thank you so much for watching this far. You are honestly probably one of like 100 people or maybe 1,000 people that made it to the end of this course. So if you made it through a 3+ hour course, huge respect. Just go make sure that you execute on a lot of the ideas and on a lot of the things that were taught to you throughout this course, and I'll see you in the next video.